Clara signed her name on the marriage certificate with a hand that would not stop shaking. She had never met the man standing 3 feet away. She did not look up. She could not. Because if she looked at Nathan Caldwell, really looked at him, she was afraid she would fall apart right there in front of everyone, and she had promised herself she would never let anyone see her break. She signed. She folded her hands. And she told herself this was not the end of her life. She was wrong. It was the beginning. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart, please subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very last word. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all started. Clara Whitmore woke up the morning of her wedding day to the sound of her younger brother crying through the wall. Not sobbing. Not the loud, dramatic kind of crying that children do when they want attention. This was the quiet kind, the kind a boy makes when he is trying very hard not to be heard. The kind that comes from a place so deep inside a person that it bypasses pride entirely. She lay still on her thin mattress and listened. Noah. 11 years old. The one who always pretended everything was fine. The one who told her every morning at breakfast that things were going to get better, even when there was barely anything on the table to eat. If Noah was crying, then things were not fine. Clara sat up. She pressed her feet to the cold floor. She did not have the luxury of letting herself feel what she was feeling. Not yet, maybe not ever. So she did what she always did. She breathed in through her nose, breathed out through her mouth, and stood up. She got dressed in the only good dress she owned. A pale blue cotton thing that her mother had made 3 summers ago, back when her mother was still alive to make things. She walked to the wall between her room and her brother's room and pressed her palm flat against it. Just for a second. Just so Noah would know if walls could carry such things that she was there. Then she went to the kitchen to make breakfast. Eli was already awake. 9 years old, small for his age, sitting at the table with his chin resting on his fists. He looked up at Clara when she came in, and his face did something complicated the way a child's face does when they are old enough to understand that something is wrong, but too young to understand exactly what. "Are you still going?" he asked. Clara set the iron pan on the stove. "Yes." "Do you want to?" She did not answer immediately. She cracked 2 eggs into the pan, their last 2 eggs as it happened, and watched them sizzle. "It doesn't matter what I want," she said finally. "It matters to me," Eli said. Clara turned around. She looked at her little brother, his serious face, his 2 big ears, the way his hair stuck up on one side because he always slept on his left, and she felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, just crack. A hairline fracture she could not afford right now. "I know it does," she said. "And that is exactly why I'm going." Their uncle Walter Hayes arrived at the house 40 minutes later, dressed in his good coat and wearing the satisfied expression of a man who has gotten exactly what he wanted. Walter was their mother's brother. Clara had never liked him. Even as a child, she had noticed the way his eyes moved around a room, always calculating, always measuring, always looking for what he could use. But he was family, and after their parents died, family was all they had. Or so she had believed. It turned out that Walter had been quietly, methodically destroying what was left of the Whitmore family for years. He had borrowed money under their parents' names. He had signed documents they never saw. He had accumulated debts that he then held over Clara's head like a blade. 2 weeks ago, he had sat her down at this very kitchen table and laid it all out. "Nathan Caldwell needs a wife," Walter had said, folding his hands. "He needs one for legal reasons, something to do with the land inheritance, I'm told. He's willing to pay handsomely for the arrangement. I've already agreed on your behalf." Clara had stared at him. "You agreed on my behalf?" "You don't have a choice, Clara. The debts I've accumulated, they're in your family's name. If I call them in, you lose this house. The boys go to the county home." He said it so calmly, like he was reading from a grocery list. "Or you marry Caldwell, the debts disappear, and I make sure the boys are provided for." "You would send Eli and Noah to the county home," Clara said slowly. "Your own nephews." Walter shrugged. "I'd prefer not to, which is why I'm offering you this solution. That was the moment Clara understood exactly what her uncle was. Not family. A transaction. A man who had turned the people around him into pieces on a board he was playing alone. She had not cried that night. She had waited until the boys were asleep, and then she had gone out to the back of the house and stood in the cold until her hands went numb, just trying to feel something other than the particular kind of fury that has nowhere to go. Then she came back inside and started making a plan. Jaw. Now Walter stood in her kitchen doorway, looking pleased, and Clara set 2 plates of eggs in front of her brothers and turned to face him. "The wagon is waiting," Walter said. "I know. You'll want to say your goodbyes quickly. Caldwell's a punctual man." "I'll say my goodbyes in whatever time I need," Clara said. Her voice was quiet. It was always quiet. But there was something in it that made Walter blink. He stepped back. Clara turned to her brothers. Eli was staring at his eggs. Noah had come out of the bedroom at some point she hadn't even heard him, and was standing in the doorway to the hall. His eyes red, but his face composed in that way he had that heartbreaking effort at being brave. "Come here," Clara said. They both came. She pulled them against her one arm around each of them and held on longer than she probably should have. She could feel Noah's ribs under her hands. She could feel Eli's breath uneven and trying hard to stay even. "Listen to me," she said quietly. "Both of you. You are going to be fine. You hear me? You are going to be absolutely fine." "What if we need you?" Noah asked. His voice was muffled against her shoulder. "Then you find a way to get a message to me. Walter knows where I'll be." She pulled back just enough to look at both of their faces. "And I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll eat. Promise me you'll go to school. Promise me you won't let anyone make you feel like you don't matter. Because you do. You matter more than anything in this world." Eli grabbed her hand, squeezed it hard. "We'll be okay," he said. But his chin was wobbling. "I know you will." Clara pressed a kiss to the top of his head, then Noah's. "Because you're Whitmore's, and Whitmores don't quit." She stood up. She picked up the small bag she had packed the night before, and she walked out the door before she could change her mind. The wagon ride took nearly 2 hours. Clara sat across from Walter and stared out at the frozen road without seeing any of it. She turned her mother's ring around and around on her finger, a thin gold band with a small chip of garnet, the only thing left of real value after everything else was gone. Walter tried to make conversation twice. Clara did not respond either time. She was thinking about what she knew of Nathan Caldwell, which was not much, just the things that float around a small town, the way smoke floats through a building seeping under doors, filling corners. She knew he was wealthy. She knew he owned land that stretched further than a man could ride in a day. She knew he had ranch hands who spoke of him with a particular kind of respect that was different from the ordinary kind. Not the respect people give to money, but the kind they give to someone they have seen do something worth respecting. She also knew he had been alone for years. People did not talk directly about why. They talked around it in the way people talk around things that frightened them. Something had happened. Something involving a woman, some said. A family member, others whispered. Nobody agreed on the details, only on the fact that whatever it was had left a mark. A man with a mark. Clara understood that kind of person. She had marks of her own. When the wagon finally turned through the gate of Caldwell Ranch and the main house came into view, Clara felt her heart do something involuntary, not fear exactly, but a kind of bracing. The way a person leans into wind before it hits. The house was large. That was the first thing. Larger than any house she had been inside. 2 stories, solid timber, a wide porch running the full length of the front. Not fancy the way wealthy people in town could be fancy, not decorated or showy. Just built to last. Built the way someone builds something when they intend to be there forever. There was a man standing on the porch. How was taller than she expected. Broad through the shoulders, the way working men are, not the soft broadness of men who eat well and do little. His hat was in his hands. He was watching the wagon come through the gate with an expression she could not read at that distance. Walter climbed down first and greeted him with a handshake, and the kind of wide smile Clara had learned to distrust on sight. Nathan. Looking well, looking well. As promised, Clara Whitmore, soon to be Clara Caldwell. Clara climbed down from the wagon herself before anyone could offer her a hand or make her feel like something being delivered. She stood in the dust and looked up at Nathan Caldwell. He was looking at her. Not in the way men in town sometimes looked at her, evaluating, dismissing. Not with pity, not with the particular kind of appetite that made her want to step backward. He was just looking at her the way a person looks at someone they are genuinely trying to understand. He stepped forward. He extended his hand. Clara shook it. His grip was firm but careful. The hand of a man who knew his own strength and chose how to use it. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. "Thank you for making the trip." Thank you. As if she had come of her own free will. Something flickered in her chest, not quite anger, not quite grief. Something that did not have a name yet. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. Walter was already talking something about the weather, something about the roads, and Nathan turned to look at him with an expression that was perfectly civil, and somehow communicated very clearly that Walter was not the person he was interested in. "Why don't you head inside?" Nathan said to Clara. "Mrs. Garrett will show you around. I'll join you shortly." Clara looked at the house, then back at him. "All right," she said. She walked up the porch steps with her chin level and her hands at her sides, and her heart making enough noise inside her chest that she was mildly surprised no one else could hear it. Mrs. Garrett was the housekeeper, a compact woman in her 60s with gray hair and practical hands, and the specific efficiency of someone who has run a large household for decades and has seen enough strange things that very little surprises her anymore. She showed Clara through the house matter-of-factly naming rooms and functions without commentary. Kitchen, parlor, dining room, linen closet. She took Clara upstairs and showed her a room at the end of the hall. "Mr. Caldwell thought you'd want your own space," Mrs. Garrett said. "He had this room prepared for you. It's yours. The key is on the dresser." Clara stood in the doorway and looked at the room. A real bed, not the thin mattress she had slept on her whole life. A wash basin. A window with clean curtains. A dresser with a small mirror. She looked at the key on the dresser. "He's giving me a key to my own room," she said slowly. "Yes, ma'am." "In his house." Mrs. Garrett looked at her steadily. "Yes, ma'am." Clara did not know what to do with that. She stepped inside and set her bag down and stood very still for a moment. "He's not what people say," Mrs. Garrett said from the doorway. Clara turned. "What do people say?" "That he's cold." Mrs. Garrett considered this. "He's not cold. He's careful. There's a difference." She folded her hands. "Supper's at 6. He'll want to speak with you after." She left. Clara sat on the edge of the bed. She pressed her hands together in her lap and concentrated very hard on breathing normally. She thought about Eli and Noah sitting in the kitchen of the house she had grown up in, eating those eggs, maybe still trying not to cry. She thought about the key on the dresser. She picked it up. She turned it over in her hand. Then she put it in her pocket, and she went downstairs to help Mrs. Garrett with supper, because she did not know how to sit still in a strange place and wait for things to happen to her. She never had. Supper was quiet, in the way that two strangers who do not yet have a language for each other are quiet. Nathan sat at one end of the table. Clara sat at the other. Mrs. Garrett had gone home for the evening. The ranch hands ate separately in the bunkhouse. It was just the two of them. Clara had expected him to make proclamations, to lay out rules, to explain what was expected of her. That was what she had been bracing for the moment when the arrangement revealed its real face, when the civility fell away and the transaction underneath became plain. Instead, Nathan passed her the bread basket and asked, "How long have your brothers been in your care?" Clara blinked. "About 4 years, since our parents died." "And their ages?" "Eli is 9, Noah is 11. Nathan nodded slowly. He cut his meat with the deliberate precision of someone who is actually thinking about something else. "They're good boys." "They're the best people I know," Clara said, and she meant it with a fierceness that surprised even her. Nathan looked up from his plate. He studied her for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression very slightly, almost invisible, like a door opening a crack in a house you thought was empty. "Then they'll be fine," he said. "Walter won't touch them." Clara set down her fork. "You can say that with confidence." "I can." "How?" He met her eyes. "Because I'm going to make sure of it." The words landed in the room like something solid. Clara stared at him. She was trying to find the catch, the place where the offer curled back on itself and became something else. She had learned to look for that place in everything people offered her. She could not find it. "Mr. Caldwell," she said carefully, "I want to be honest with you. Please. I did not come here willingly. I came here because I did not have a choice. I came here because my uncle threatened my family, and I could not see another way out." She held his gaze. "I think you deserve to know that." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his own fork and looked at her. Really looked at her, and said something she would remember for the rest of her life. "Miss Whitmore, I know exactly why you came, and I want you to know something in return." He paused. "You are not a payment for someone else's debt. You are not a transaction. You are a person who deserves a choice, and the fact that you were denied that choice is not something I intend to benefit from." The room was very quiet. Clara did not speak. "You have your own room," Nathan continued. "You have a key to that room. You have the freedom to come and go as you need. If there is anything you require, you ask Mrs. Garrett or you ask me. And if after some time you decide this arrangement is not something you can live with..." He stopped. "We'll figure something out. But you will not be trapped here." Clara looked down at the table. Her hands were in her lap, and she was pressing them together because they had started to tremble slightly, and she refused to let that show. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Because there's no reason not to be," Nathan said simply. She looked up. He had already picked up his fork again and returned to his supper, as though what he had just said was the most ordinary thing in the world. Clara sat with it for the rest of the meal. She had been prepared for 100 different versions of this night. She had prepared herself for anger, for coldness, for cruelty, dressed up as courtesy. She had prepared herself to endure. She had not prepared herself for this. The first week at Caldwell Ranch was a study in contradictions. Nathan was a man of few words, that much was clear from the first day. He did not fill silences with noise the way many people do. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said, and when he had nothing to say, he said nothing, which Clara found to her own surprise restful. What she had not expected was how much she could learn about a person from watching them work. She watched Nathan in those first days, because she did not know what else to do with herself. She was not idle by nature. She was in fact constitutionally incapable of sitting still when there were things to be done, and there were always things to be done on a ranch of this size. She started helping in the kitchen the second morning without asking, because Mrs. Garrett was clearly overworked, and because Clara did not know how to watch someone struggle and not step in. Mrs. Garrett had looked surprised, then pleased. She moved over and made room, and they worked side by side without much conversation, which suited Clara perfectly. But it was through the kitchen window, and through the wide front windows of the parlor, and from the porch where she sometimes stood in the early mornings with her coffee, that Clara began to piece Nathan Caldwell together. She saw him stop what he was doing to help a young ranch hand whose horse had gone lame. Not direct a subordinate to handle it, but stop, crouch down, and work on that horse's hoof himself for the better part of an hour. She saw him on the third morning load a wagon with supplies and send 2 of his men out with it. When she asked Mrs. Garrett where it was going, the older woman said simply, "The Hennessy family lost most of their winter stores. Mr. Caldwell sends provisions when he can. Does he do that often?" Mrs. Garrett had looked at her with that particular expression she seemed to keep for questions with obvious answers. "Regularly," she said. She saw him late one evening, sitting at the desk in his study, with a ledger open in front of him, working with the focused stillness of a man who took his responsibilities seriously. The door was open. He did not know she was passing in the hall. He rubbed the back of his neck once, the way a man does when the numbers are not adding up the way he needs them to, and then he straightened and kept going. All of this she filed away. Quietly. Carefully. The way she had learned to file everything as information as evidence, as the slow accumulation of truth about a person before she allowed herself to have a feeling about them. And then there was the door. The locked room was on the ground floor at the far end of the hall, past the parlor. It had nothing to distinguish it from the other doors, except a heavy lock, and the fact that it was always without exception closed. Clara might not have noticed it at all if she had not seen Nathan's face the first time he passed it while she was standing nearby. She had been coming from the kitchen with a basket of mending she had offered to take on, and Nathan had been walking from the front door toward his study, walking with the long, unhurried stride of a man entirely at home in his own house when he passed that door, and stopped. Not physically. He did not stop walking. But something in him stopped some internal motion, some ordinary flow of being for just a fraction of a second. And his face, which was normally set in the composed, weathered steadiness that seemed to be its natural state, did something she had no word for. Not grief exactly, not guilt, something that contained both and was neither. And then he walked on, and the expression was gone, and by the time he turned into his study, he was again exactly the same man who had eaten supper across from her in even measured quiet. But Clara had seen it, and she did not forget. She did not ask about the room. She would not have asked even if she had known how. Some things about a person were not yours to pry open. She understood that. She had her own locked rooms things. She did not speak of feelings. She had learned to keep behind doors that she controlled. But she thought about it. Late at night in her room with the key on her nightstand and the curtains shifting in the cold draft from the window, she thought about what could be behind a door that made a man like Nathan Caldwell look like that. 12 days after Clara arrived at Caldwell Ranch, she met Lily. Lily was Nathan's niece, 8 years old, the daughter of his younger sister, left in Nathan's care 6 months ago, after a series of events that Mrs. Garrett declined to elaborate on, and Clara declined to press about. She appeared at one morning materialized from the upper part of the house, sitting across the table from Clara, with the particular watchful solemnity of a child who has learned to assess adults before committing to trusting them. She stared at Clara for a long, unbroken moment. Clara stared back calm and unhurried because she had grown up around children, and she understood that this was a test. "Are you the new wife?" Lily asked. "I'm Clara," Clara said. "That's not what I asked." Clara considered this. "Yes, I'm the new wife. Uncle Nathan didn't have a wife before." "I know." "Why did he get one now?" Nathan, who was sitting at the head of the table and had not looked up from his coffee during this exchange, said Lily. "I'm just asking," Lily said, not looking at him. "It's all right," Clara said to both of them. She looked at Lily. "That's a fair question. Some things are complicated to explain. But I'm here now, and I'd like it very much if we could be friends. If you want to be." Lily studied her. "Do you know how to braid hair?" "Yes. Uncle Nathan doesn't know how." This was delivered with the weighty accusation that only small girls can bring to bear on the subject of hair. "My hair is always a mess." "I noticed," Clara said gravely. "I can fix that." Lily's expression shifted. Not a smile exactly, but its immediate precursor, the moment just before a child decides to let you in. "After breakfast." "After breakfast," Clara agreed. Nathan looked up from his coffee. He was looking at Clara. She caught his eye for just a moment before he looked back down. She did not know what his expression meant. She told herself it did not matter. But that evening, after Lily had gone to bed with her hair in 2 neat braids and a somewhat revolutionary satisfaction on her face, Nathan found Clara on the porch watching the last pale light go out of the sky. He stood beside her. They were quiet for a little while. Then he said, "She hasn't taken to someone that quickly since—" He stopped. "Since a long time." "She's lonely," Clara said. "That's not a hard thing to see." "No," he agreed. "I suppose it isn't." He paused. I'm not good at knowing what children need. The quiet things, the everyday things." "You're good at the big things," Clara said, because she had been watching him for nearly 2 weeks, and this was true. "The safety, the security, the making sure everything holds together." He looked at her sideways. "Is that a compliment?" It's an observation, she said. Though I suppose it could be both. The corner of his mouth moved, very slightly. Clara looked back at the sky. It was the first time she had seen anything close to a smile on his face. She decided she wanted to see it again. She had been there 3 weeks when Walter came back. She was in the garden, or what would be the garden come spring. Right now it was cold-hardened earth and dead stalks. But Clara had been reading about growing seasons and making plans in a little notebook she had found in the parlor when she heard the wagon coming up the road. She knew it was Walter before she saw him. She had an instinct for it, some animal awareness of a person whose presence had always meant trouble. The back of her neck prickled. She stayed where she was. She did not run inside. She did not drop her notebook. She stood in the dead garden with her spine straight and watched him drive through the gate. He saw her and smiled. She did not smile back. Walter climbed down with his easy, unhurried manner, the manner of a man who had never quite learned that not every space was his to occupy. He looked around the ranch with something that made Clara's skin tighten and ownership in his gaze, as though he were surveying property. "Clara," he said, "you look well. Ranch life agrees with you. What do you want, Walter?" He pressed a hand to his chest. "Can't a man check on family?" "We're not family," Clara said. "You've made that fairly clear." Walter's smile did not waver, but something behind it went flat. Now, there's no need for, "What do you want?" She said it the same way both times. Flat, even. The way you say something to a person who you have decided will not make you flinch. Walter looked at her for a moment, with something she had not seen in his face before. Not quite surprise, but a recalibration. The way a man recalculates when the terrain is different than he expected. "I came to speak with Nathan," he said. "About what? Business." "What business?" "Clara. He's not here right now." This was true. Nathan had ridden out with 2 of his men that morning to check the fence lines on the south pasture. "If you'd like to leave a message, I'll pass it along." Walter looked past her toward the house. "I'll wait." "You'll wait in Willow Creek," Clara said. "And if Nathan wants to speak with you, he'll send word." There was a pause. Walter looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time in perhaps her entire life, as though seeing her as something other than an instrument he could use. "You've gotten bold," he said. "Not a compliment, not quite a threat." "I've gotten clear," Clara said. "There's a difference." She held his gaze for 5 full seconds. Then she turned and walked back toward the house, because she had a garden to plan, and a little girl who would want her hair braided before supper, and a man who deserved to know that his unwanted visitors were not welcome on his property. She did not look back. Her hands were shaking when she got inside. She pressed them flat on the kitchen table and breathed until they stopped. Then she went to find Mrs. Garrett and tell her what had happened, because she was new here and she did not yet know everything she needed to know. But she knew enough to understand that Walter Hayes coming back was not a coincidence. It was the beginning of something, and she intended to be ready. When Nathan returned that evening, Clara told him about Walter's visit. She told him plainly, without drama, the way she tried to tell things, just the facts in order. What time he arrived, what he said, what she said, what happened when he left. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her garden notebook open in front of her, and she told the whole thing without looking up. When she finished, there was a silence. She looked up. Nathan was standing with his hat still in his hand, and his jaw set in a way she had not seen before. Not anger, or not only anger. Something that ran deeper than anger. Something older. "He left?" Nathan asked. "He drove back out the gate. I watched until the wagon was out of sight." Nathan nodded, slowly. He set his hat on the table and pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He looked at her garden notebook. "What's this?" "Plans," Clara said. "For the south side of the house. I thought if it's all right, I thought I might put in a kitchen garden in spring. Vegetables, some herbs. It would save on supplies." He looked at the neat diagrams she had drawn, the little labeled squares, the planting schedule she had worked out. He looked at them for a long moment. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "What Walter did bringing you here, the way he did it." He stopped, started again. I want you to know that I was aware when I agreed to this arrangement that it was not done right. The way you were brought into this wasn't right. And I've been trying to figure out how to say that to you since the day you arrived." Clara was quiet. "I should have found another way," he said. "I should have found a way that didn't ask you to give up the life you had." "The life I had," Clara said slowly, "was sewing until my hands bled and hoping Walter didn't call the debt before I could scrape together enough to stay ahead of it." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not saying this is easy. I'm saying that the life I had was not one I'm mourning." He looked at her. "I'm mourning my brothers," she said, and her voice was even, but just barely. "I'm mourning waking up in the morning without knowing if they're all right. I'm mourning not being there if something goes wrong." She pressed her lips together. "That's what I've lost. Not the life, the proximity." Nathan was very still. "Then I need to fix that," he said. "Fix it how? I'll ride to town tomorrow. I'll make arrangements for your brothers to visit, regularly, or—" He paused. "If you want them here, if that's better." Clara stared at him. "You'd do that," she said. Not a question. An attempt to verify something that seemed too simple. "Of course I would," he said as though it were obvious, as though it had never been otherwise. Clara looked down at her garden notebook, at the small neat squares and the planting schedule, and the little notes she had made in the margins. She had made them because she was a person who planned ahead, who had always had to plan ahead, who had never had the luxury of assuming that tomorrow would simply happen without careful preparation. She had made them because without quite deciding to, she had begun to think of this place as somewhere she might actually be. She closed the notebook. "Nathan," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you." He nodded once. Then he stood and picked up his hat and said he was going to check on the horses, and he walked out, and Clara sat alone in the kitchen and looked at her hands and thought that she had been wrong about a great many things. She had been wrong about what this place would feel like. She had been wrong about who this man was. She was beginning to suspect she might be wrong about a great many more things. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, being wrong felt like something she might be able to live with. It was 3 weeks later on a cold night when the wind had been battering the house since sundown that Clara first tried the door. She did not mean to. Or rather, she had been thinking about it the way you think about something you know you should leave alone, the way the thought of it keeps finding you in quiet moments when you'd rather not be found. She had told herself she would not. She had told herself it was none of her business. She had told herself that a locked door was a locked door, and the man who locked it had his reasons. But she had been up late, unable to sleep, listening to the wind, and she had gone downstairs for water. And she had stood in the dark hall, and the door had been right there. She put her hand on the doorknob. It turned. It was unlocked. She stood very still for a moment. Then she pushed the door open. The room was not what she expected. She had built up so many versions of it in her imagination, a shrine to something terrible, evidence of something shameful, a space that explained the sorrow on Nathan's face when he passed it. What she found was simpler than any of those things, and somehow harder to look at. It was a child's room, small bed with a faded quilt, a wooden rocking horse in the corner, one of its ears chipped, a shelf of books, picture books small and worn, a name painted on the wall in careful letters, the kind a parent paints, James. Clara stood in the doorway and did not go in. She looked at the rocking horse and the faded quilt and the name on the wall, and she understood with a certainty that needed no explanation what she was looking at. She understood why Nathan passed this door the way he did. She understood what he had lost. She pulled the door closed. She stood in the dark hall with her back against the wall and her eyes closed and her heart doing something enormous and painful in her chest. She did not ask him about it. Not the next day. Not the day after. She just was there. She was there in the mornings with coffee. She was there in the evenings with the quiet, undemanding presence of someone who did not require you to be anything other than what you were. And one afternoon, about a week later, Nathan found her reading on the porch and sat down in the chair beside her and said without preamble, "I had a son." Clara set her book down. "His name was James," Nathan said. "He was 4 years old. There was an accident. He and his mother both. He was looking at the horizon. His voice was steady, the way things are steady when they have been broken and then very carefully put back together. That was 6 years ago. I'm sorry, Clara said. I should have told you sooner. About the room. You didn't owe me that. I think I did. He looked at her. You're living in this house. You deserve to know what's in it. Clara looked at him. This man with his careful hands and his secret generosity and the sorrow he carried so quietly that most people probably never noticed it was there. The room is part of the house, she said, and it should stay exactly as it is for as long as you need it to. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Lily asked me yesterday if you were going to stay, he said. Clara raised her eyebrows. I told her I hoped so, Nathan said. The wind moved through the porch. Somewhere in the distance one of the horses made a sound. I think I might be, Clara said quietly. Nathan looked back at the horizon. Neither of them said anything else, but the silence between them for the first time felt like something chosen rather than something imposed, like a place they had both agreed to stand together without needing to explain why. And in that silence, without either of them quite seeing it happen, something shifted. The arrangement that had never felt like one thing became something else entirely. And what it was becoming neither of them had a word for yet. But both of them could feel it. And neither of them was afraid. The day after, Nathan told her about James. Clara woke up earlier than usual. She did not know exactly why. There was no sound that pulled her from sleep, no particular worry that had been waiting for her at the surface of consciousness. She simply opened her eyes in the gray half-dark of her room and knew with the certainty of someone who has learned to pay attention to the quiet signals her own body sends that something had changed. Not outside. Inside. She lay still for a moment and let herself feel it. She was not a person who indulged in feelings carelessly. She had spent too many years in circumstances that required her to be practical, efficient, always moving toward the next thing that needed doing. Feelings were luxuries. She deferred the way some people deferred spending money they did not have. You could acknowledge them, file them away, return to them later when the immediate crisis had passed. But the thing she felt lying in her bed that morning was not something she could file away. Nathan had trusted her with the heaviest thing he carried. He had not asked her to carry it with him. He had not made her responsible for it. He had simply said, "This is in me, and now you know." And in the saying of it, something between them had shifted so fundamentally that the person she had been the day before, the girl who had arrived at this ranch afraid and braced and refusing to want anything, felt like someone she was already becoming past. She got up. She went downstairs. She made coffee. Nathan was already at the table. This was not unusual. He was always awake before her. One of those people whose relationship with sleep seemed functional rather than indulgent, who rose with the work rather than against it. What was unusual was that he looked up when she came in and said, "Good morning," in a voice that was different from the careful neutrality he had maintained in their first weeks. Less guarded. Marginally. But she heard it. "Good morning," she said. She poured 2 cups and set one in front of him and sat down with the other. They were quiet for a while. The good kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't require filling. "I was thinking," Nathan said after a while, "about what you said. About Eli and Noah." Clara looked at him over her cup. "I sent a rider to town this morning, early. Asked him to check in on them and bring back word." He paused. "I should have done it sooner." Clara put her cup down. "You sent someone to check on my brothers." "I said I would." "That was last night." "I meant it last night," he said simply. She looked at him. This man who said things and then did them as though the distance between a promise and its fulfillment were not the vast, treacherous territory she had learned to expect from people, as though words and actions were just 2 parts of the same thing. "You're going to confuse me," she said, "if you keep doing that." The corner of his mouth moved. "Doing what?" "Being exactly what you say you are." He looked at her for a moment, and something in his eyes shifted. Not the crack she had seen before, but a different kind of opening. Quieter, more deliberate. "I'll try to be more inconsistent," he said. Clara laughed. She surprised herself. It came out before she could catch it. Not a polite sound, not the careful, controlled kind of laugh she had learned to produce when social situations required it, but the real thing. Brief and startled, and entirely her own. Nathan looked at her as though he had not expected it either. As though it was something he needed a moment to absorb. Then he looked back at his coffee, and Clara composed herself, and neither of them mentioned it. But the sound of it stayed in the room longer than sounds usually do. The writer came back by mid-morning with news that both boys were well, that Noah had apparently gotten into a disagreement with a schoolmate over something involving a broken fence and a pair of boots, and that Eli had been asking anyone who would listen when Clara was coming to visit. Nathan handed her the note the writer brought and watched her read it. She read it twice. Then she folded it and held it in her hands and pressed her lips together very firmly. "They're all right," he said. "They're all right," she agreed. Her voice was steady. Everything else was not. "I'll arrange for them to come out Saturday," Nathan said. "If you want." She nodded. She could not quite speak yet. He stood and picked up his hat from the table and said he was going to ride out to the east pasture, and he left her alone in the kitchen with the folded note in her hands, and Clara allowed herself just for a minute to press her forehead down onto the table and breathe. 1 minute. That was all she gave herself. Then she straightened up, put the note in her pocket, and went to find Lily, because the little girl had been asking her to teach her how to make biscuits, and today seemed like a very good day to do something with your hands. What Clara did not know, what she would not know for weeks yet, was that Walter Hayes had not driven back to Willow Creek and let the matter rest. Walter was not the kind of man who let matters rest. He had in fact spent the days following his visit to the ranch doing what he did best, talking. Positioning. Planting seeds in the fertile soil of a small town's collective attention, where gossip grew fast and weeded itself poorly. He had coffee with the sheriff's deputy and mentioned in passing that he was worried about his niece, a delicate girl, he said, unused to the roughness of ranch life, perhaps not entirely herself since the marriage. He had supper with the minister's wife and expressed what he called a concerned uncle's uncertainty about whether the arrangement between Clara and Nathan had been entirely above board. He stopped in front of the dry goods store and spoke with two women whose primary occupation when they were not occupied with other things was the careful distribution of information around the town of Willow Creek. He did not say anything outright. Walter was too clever for outright. He implied, he suggested, he offered small pieces of information wrapped in the language of concern and let people's imaginations do the rest. Within 2 weeks, there was a version of Clara's story circulating through Willow Creek that went something like this. A calculating young woman from a poor family had maneuvered herself into a marriage with the richest man in the county, and nobody knew quite how, but the fact that her uncle had arranged it was suspicious, wasn't it? And had anyone noticed how quickly she'd made herself comfortable out there? And what did Nathan Caldwell really know about this girl anyway? Clara did not know any of this yet. She was making biscuits with Lily and writing letters to her brothers and learning the rhythms of a life she had not chosen and was beginning cautiously to want. But Walter's words were moving through the town like water finding the cracks in stone. They would reach her eventually. Saturday came, and with it Eli and Noah. Walter had arranged the transport. He was still technically their guardian, and Clara had spent the 2 days before their arrival in a state of contained anticipation that expressed itself as excessive productivity. She cleaned things that did not need cleaning. She reorganized the kitchen shelves. She made 3 pies. Mrs. Garrett watched all of this with the calm expression of a woman who had seen a great many things and understood what this particular variety of restless energy meant. "They'll be fine," she said on Friday evening when Clara was re-washing a pot that had already been washed. "I know," Clara said. "And so will you." Clara set the pot down. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone paying attention," Mrs. Garrett said. "Which I always am." Clara almost smiled. "How long have you worked for Nathan?" 11 years. "And what was he like before?" Mrs. Garrett was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone deciding how much to give. "He was different," she said finally. "Not worse, not better, different." She picked up a dish towel and dried her hands with methodical care. "He laughed more easily. He made plans out loud instead of just acting on them. She paused. He had someone to make plans with. Clara did not say anything. After the accident, Mrs. Garrett said, he closed a lot of himself off. The way a house closes when the people inside it leave, shutters go up, doors get locked. Everything gets very quiet. He kept going because that's what he does. But there was less of him visible. She set the dish towel down. Until recently. Clara kept her eyes on the pot she had already cleaned twice. It isn't me, she said carefully. I didn't say it was you specifically, Mrs. Garrett said. I said it was recently. She picked up her coat from the hook by the door. Good night, Clara. She left. Clara stood in the kitchen alone and thought about shutters and locked doors and the specific quality of a house that has been closed for a long time and what it means when it starts slowly, carefully to open. Eli came through the door at a dead run and hit Clara in the midsection hard enough to knock the breath out of her. She grabbed him. She held on. She pressed her face into the top of his head, and he smelled like cold air and the slightly unwashed smell that boys his age specialized in. And she had to remind herself firmly that she was not going to cry in the front hall of Nathan Caldwell's house. She was not. She absolutely was not. She cried a little. Eli, for his part, was crying too, which he would have denied furiously if asked, but his shoulders were shaking against her, and his arms were locked around her waist with a grip that suggested he was not planning to let go anytime soon. Noah hung back for a moment. 11 was old enough to feel self-conscious about displays of emotion in strange places. But Clara reached out her free arm, and he came, and for a minute, they were just the three of them standing in a hallway holding on. When they finally separated, Clara held both of their faces in her hands and looked at them. Really looked. Checking. The way she had always done the instinctive inventory of a person who had spent 4 years making sure 2 children were safe. They looked all right. They looked more than all right. Noah had gotten a haircut since she'd seen him, which meant someone was paying attention. Eli had a new pair of boots. Where did the boots come from? She asked. Eli looked down at them with the particular pride of a boy who has recently acquired something good. Mr. Caldwell sent them, he said. Last week, the writer brought them. Clara looked up. Nathan was standing in the doorway to the hall, having come in from outside with his coat still on, watching the reunion with an expression that he was clearly attempting to make neutral and was not entirely succeeding at. You sent boots, she said. He needed them, Nathan said. His old ones had a hole in the left sole. How did you know about the hole in the sole? The writer told me. You asked the writer about his boots. I asked the writer how they were doing, Nathan said. He mentioned the boots. He looked at Eli. They fit all right. Eli nodded with great conviction. Good. Nathan looked at Noah. You must be Noah. Yes, sir, Noah said. He was doing the thing Clara recognized, the careful assessment, the measuring of a person before committing to a response. He had been doing it since he was 6 years old. It was the look of a child who had learned early that adults were not automatically trustworthy. He studied Nathan for a long moment. Then he said, Eli says the horses here are the best in the county. Some of them might be, Nathan said. He says you've got a gray one that can outrun anything. I've got a gray one that thinks it can, Nathan said. Whether it's right depends on the day. Noah's expression shifted. Not a smile, but close. Would it be all right to see them, the horses? Nathan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Clara. She gave him nothing because she was curious to see what he would do without her guidance. Put your bag down, Nathan said to Noah. I'll take you out after lunch. Noah looked at Clara. She raised her eyebrows in a way that meant you heard the man. He almost smiled. That afternoon, while Nathan took Noah and Eli to the stables, and Lily trailed after them with the focused intensity of a small person determined not to be left out of anything interesting, Clara found herself in the kitchen with Mrs. Garrett, the two of them working side by side in the comfortable rhythm they had developed, and for the first time since she had arrived at Caldwell Ranch, she let herself think something she had not allowed herself to think before. This could be a life, not just an arrangement, not just a temporary circumstance she was enduring while she figured out the next thing. A life. With biscuits and kitchen gardens, and a little girl who let her braid her hair, and boys who ran at her like they had been running toward her their whole lives, and a man who sent boots to a child he had never met because a writer mentioned a hole in the sole. She set down the bowl she was holding. "Are you all right?" Mrs. Garrett asked. "I'm thinking," Clara said. "About what?" Clara picked the bowl back up. "About how strange it is," she said, "to end up somewhere you never planned to be, and then realize you might not want to be anywhere else." Mrs. Garrett said nothing, but the corners of her mouth moved. Clara went back to her work. Outside, she could hear Noah's voice rising with something that sounded like genuine excitement, a sound she had not heard from him in longer than she wanted to count, and beneath it lower, she could hear Nathan's voice responding steady and patient, the voice of someone who had time for questions. She thought about the locked room, the faded quilt, the name on the wall, the fact that a man who had lost a child could stand in a stable and talk about horses with someone else's child, as though it cost him nothing, and it did not cost him nothing. She knew that she knew. It did cost him something. She had seen his face, but he did it anyway. Because the child wanted to know about the gray horse. And that was enough. That was the kind of man he was. She had thought when she arrived that she would have to be vigilant, that she would have to protect herself, monitor everything. Never let herself be lulled into feeling safe, because feeling safe was how people got hurt. She had thought this place was something to survive. She was beginning to understand it was something else entirely. And the understanding settled into her chest like warmth, unfamiliar, slightly alarming, and real. Walter came on a Tuesday. Not to the ranch this time, to town. Clara had gone to Willow Creek to pick up supplies. The first time Nathan had suggested she take the wagon herself, and she had gone because she refused to be the kind of person who hid on a ranch out of fear of a town's opinions, whatever those opinions were. She knew walking down the main street that something was different. She had grown up in Willow Creek. She knew its rhythms, its social weather. She knew what it meant when women who had always nodded to her in passing suddenly found something else to look at when she came near. She knew what it meant when two men talking in front of the feed store went quiet as she passed. She went into the dry goods store and filled her list, and did not let any of it show on her face. She was on her way back to the wagon when Margaret Hollis stepped out of the milliner's shop directly into her path. Margaret was 45, sharp-featured, the wife of one of the town's 3 lawyers. She was not precisely unkind. She was the kind of person who was capable of kindness when it cost her nothing, which is not actually the same thing. "Clara," she said. "Or I suppose I should say Mrs. Caldwell." "Clara is fine," Clara said. "Of course." Margaret smiled, the kind of smile that does not involve the eyes. "How are you finding ranch life?" "Well, thank you. I'm so glad. I was a little worried, I'll admit, coming from your circumstances into something so—" She made a small gesture that managed to convey both everything and nothing specific. "Abrupt." "It wasn't abrupt," Clara said evenly. "It was arranged. Of course, your uncle is a thoughtful man." Something moved behind Margaret's eyes. "He was speaking to my husband last week, actually, about the nature of the arrangement. Something about legal questions surrounding the inheritance, the land." Clara went very still. "I'm not sure I know what you mean," she said. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing." Margaret adjusted her gloves with small, precise movements. "Your uncle simply mentioned that Mr. Caldwell needed a wife for reasons related to a land inheritance clause, some legal requirement." She tilted her head. "Which is entirely understandable, of course. These things are often more complicated than they appear. I just hope it's been comfortable, for you both. Marriages of convenience can be difficult to maintain." The words landed like something thrown. Accurate and deliberate and designed to hurt. Clara looked at Margaret Hollis and understood with absolute clarity what was happening. Walter had been here. Walter had been talking. And the story he had been telling was not the truth, but it was a version of something adjacent to the truth shaped carefully to do the most possible damage. "I appreciate your concern," Clara said. Her voice was perfectly calm. "If you'll excuse me." She walked to her wagon. She climbed up. She drove out of town. It was not until she was a mile out on the empty road with the wind in her face that she allowed herself to feel the impact of what had just happened. The town thought she was a transaction. They thought Nathan had bought a wife for legal convenience, and she had sold herself to escape poverty. They thought they had been made to think that there was nothing between her and Nathan except a cold and calculated agreement. She thought about what Nathan had said that first night. "You are a person who deserves a choice." She thought about the boots, the rider, the biscuits, the gray horse. She thought about the night on the porch when they had sat in chosen silence and neither of them had been afraid. And she felt something she was not accustomed to feeling: fury. Not the cold, suppressed, endured fury of a person who has no power. Something hotter than that. Something that said, "This is wrong, and someone is responsible, and I am not going to let it stand." She drove home faster than she had driven out. Nathan was in the study when she got back. She knocked on the open door, and he looked up, and something on her face told him immediately that this was not a routine afternoon. "What happened?" he said. She told him. All of it. Margaret's precise, smiling cruelty. The looks on the street. What Walter had apparently told people. She told it the same way she always told things, in order, plainly, without embellishment, but her voice had an edge to it. Now that was new, a current running underneath the words. When she finished, Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He told them about the inheritance clause." "Yes." "Did he tell them why I needed it met?" Clara frowned. "He made it sound like that you chose a wife for legal convenience, that it was that we were—" "That's not the whole story," Nathan said. "I didn't think it was." He leaned back in his chair. He looked at her steadily. There was something in his face that she had not seen before, a decision being made, something being weighed and then committed to. "The inheritance clause exists," he said. "My grandfather stipulated that the ranch could not be held by an unmarried man, an old-fashioned provision. My father met it. I met it when I was married the first time." He paused. "When I lost Eleanor and James, technically, the ranch should have reverted to a distant cousin. My lawyers found an argument. They held it off for years." "But not forever," Clara said. "Not forever." He looked at his hands. "When Walter approached me about you, I want to be clear about what actually happened." Clara waited. "Walter came to me claiming he had a niece who was being pressured into a marriage she didn't want. He made himself sound like he was doing you a favor by giving you a choice between two options." Nathan's voice was measured, but there was something underneath it now, controlled and very cold. "What I did not know immediately but discovered quickly was that he was the one applying the pressure. He was the one who created the situation in the first place." "When did you find out?" Clara asked. "Before the wedding," Nathan said. The room was quiet. Clara looked at him. "You knew before we married that Walter was the one threatening us?" "Yes." "And you went ahead with the marriage anyway?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her directly. "Because if I had refused, what would have happened to you? What would have happened to your brothers? Walter would have found someone else. Someone who would not have given you your own room. Someone who would not have told you that you deserved a choice." He paused. "I could not undo what Walter had done. I could only control what happened after." Clara stared at him. Something was happening in her chest. Something large and complicated and not entirely comfortable. "You married me," she said slowly, "not because you needed a wife for the inheritance. You married me because you were trying to protect me." "Among other reasons," Nathan said quietly. "What other reasons?" He held her gaze. "Because when Walter told me about you, the way he talked about you, as though you were something he owned, I wanted to meet the person he was talking about like that. And then I did meet you, and I understood immediately that he had no idea what you were." Clara was very still. "What am I?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "Someone who walked into an impossible situation, and the first thing you did," he said, "was make sure everyone around you had what they needed." The fire crackled. The wind moved against the windows. Clara stood in the doorway of the sea and felt the ground shift under her. The way it shifts in spring, when the frozen earth begins to give and something underneath starts moving again. "Walter is going to keep doing this," she said. Her voice had come back, steady, clear. He's not going to stop. No, Nathan agreed. He's not. Then we need to stop him. Nathan looked at her. Not just defend ourselves, Clara said. Not just wait for the next thing he does. We need to find out what he's actually done all of it, and we need to be ready to prove it. Nathan studied her. You sound very certain. I am certain, she said. I know how Walter works. I lived under his reach for 4 years. I know what he keeps. He keeps records of everything, not because he's honest, but because he uses them. If he has documents proving debts, those documents exist somewhere. And if those documents exist, there are probably other documents. Ones he doesn't want found. Nathan was quiet. You have a lawyer, Clara said. A good one. Then we start there, she said. We find out exactly what Walter has done to my family, maybe to others. We build a case. And when he comes at us next, and he will come at us next, we are ready. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up from the desk and extended his hand the way he had the first day she arrived, formal, deliberate. Agreed, he said. She shook it. It was different from the first time. The first time she had been shaking the hand of a stranger. Now she was shaking the hand of someone she was choosing deliberately and with full knowledge of what it cost to stand beside. The difference was everything. The following days moved with a new kind of purpose. Nathan sent for his lawyer, a quiet, thorough man named Arthur Greer, who arrived 2 days later and sat with Nathan and Clara for 3 hours, going through everything. Walter had produced the marriage agreement. The records Nathan had been quietly compiling for months about land transfers in the county that did not look right. Clara sat at that table and participated fully. She had documents of her own letters her mother had written that referenced loans she did not remember agreeing to small discrepancies in accounting. She had never understood things she had kept because her mother had taught her to keep everything. Greer looked at her across the table at one point and said, "Where did you learn to organize documentation like this?" "I didn't," Clara said. "I just never threw anything away." He looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Clara. "Some of these letters," Greer said carefully, "suggest that Walter Hayes has been misappropriating money from the Whitmore estate since before your parents' deaths, possibly years before." The room went very still. "My parents' estate," Clara said slowly. "There was barely anything." "There might have been more," Greer said, "before Walter got to it." Clara looked at the letters on the table. Her mother's handwriting, careful, slightly slanted the handwriting of a woman who had not had much education and had worked hard to make up for it. Letters wondering aloud where certain money had gone. Letters asking Walter about accounts he had offered to manage on the family's behalf. She felt something move through her that was so large she could not name it. Not grief, not anger, something that contained both and was also something else. Something to do with the specific betrayal of a person who was supposed to protect your family and instead spent years quietly dismantling it. "How much?" she asked. Greer hesitated. "How much did he take?" she said. "We'll need more time to establish the exact amount," Greer said carefully. "But based on what you've given me today, I believe it is substantial." Nathan put his hand on the table, not touching her, just near, present. Clara looked at the letters. She thought about her mother's hands red from washing other people's laundry. She thought about her father working until the cough took him, working through the cough, working until there was nothing left to work with. She thought about 4 years of sewing and scrubbing and counting every penny and every night lying awake wondering if she had done enough. She thought about Walter at the kitchen table explaining her options in his pleasant, reasonable voice. She picked up her mother's letter and folded it carefully and placed it back in the stack. "Then we'll need more time," she said. Her voice did not shake. Greer nodded. "I'll need to make some inquiries, discreetly. If Walter suspects he's being investigated before we have everything in order, he'll move things around." "How long?" Nathan asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "Then we have 3 weeks," Clara said. She stood up. "And Walter Hayes will not know we've started until we're finished." She walked out of the study and went to check on Lily and put potatoes on for supper and fold the laundry she had left in the morning and do all the ordinary things that a life is made of while underneath all of it, Something in her was running very fast toward something she could not yet see, but knew with absolute conviction was coming. 2 weeks. 3. And then the truth. The whole truth. Every last piece of it. 3 weeks was not enough time. Greer sent word on a Thursday morning, a short note delivered by his assistant that said, "Only need more time. Do not act. WH Moving Funds." Clara read it twice, handed it to Nathan without comment, and went back to kneading bread dough with her fists, because she needed to do something with her hands, or she was going to put them through a wall. Nathan read the note. Set it down. "He's moving the money. Which means he knows someone is looking," Clara said. "Or he's being cautious by habit." "Walter is not cautious by habit. He's bold by habit. Cautious means he's heard something." She pressed the heels of her hands into the dough. "Someone talked." "Greer wouldn't—" "Not Greer," Clara said. "But Greer talked to people, made inquiries, asked questions of people who know Walter." She looked up. "This is a small county, Nathan. There are no secrets here, only information that hasn't traveled yet." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" The question still surprised her weeks in. The simple, unadorned way he asked it, not "what should we do not here" is what I've decided, but "what do you want?" As though her answer were the starting point rather than an afterthought. "I want to go see my brothers," she said. He looked at her. "Not because I'm worried," she said quickly. "They're fine. I got the writer's report yesterday. They're fine." She pressed her lips together. "But if Walter is moving money, and he knows someone is investigating, then the first thing he will do, the very first thing, is remind me what he holds over my head. And what he holds is Eli and Noah." She met Nathan's eyes. "I want to see them before he uses them." Nathan had the wagon ready within the hour. He drove her himself. She had not expected that. She had assumed she would take one of the ranch hands or go alone. But Nathan simply put on his coat and took the reins, and they drove the 2 hours into Willow Creek, in a silence that was working out something between them that words would have done clumsily. Clara watched the road and thought about what Greer had said. Substantial. The amount Walter had taken from her family. She had spent a week trying not to think about the specific number, because the specific number had the power to break something in her that she needed to keep intact for what was coming. Her parents had not died poor because they had no money. They had died poor because someone they trusted had quietly, systematically taken it from them year after year, while they worked themselves to pieces, not understanding why it was never enough. She pressed her hands together in her lap. "Are you all right?" Nathan asked. He did not take his eyes off the road. "I will be," she said, which was not the same thing, but was the truest answer she had. He nodded. He did not push. That was another thing about him she had learned. He never pushed for more than you were ready to give. He waited. He made space. He let you come to things in your own time, which was, she had decided, one of the rarest qualities a person could have, and also one of the most quietly powerful. They were a mile from town when she said, "My mother trusted him." Nathan waited. "She thought he was looking out for us. She told me once I was maybe 12, she told me that we were lucky to have Walter because at least there was family who cared." Clara's voice was even, deliberately even. She said that with so much relief in her voice, like it was the one thing she could count on. She paused. She was working herself to nothing, and she was grateful for the man who was stealing from her, because she didn't know. She never knew. "No," Nathan said quietly. "She didn't. I should have seen it sooner. You were a child. I was 17 when they died, old enough to keep 2 children alive on nothing," Nathan said, not harshly, just plainly. "That is what you were doing. You don't have room to blame yourself for not also investigating your uncle's finances." Clara looked at the side of his face, the set of his jaw, the steadiness of his hands on the reins. "You sound angry," she said. "I am angry," he said simply, "but not at you." She looked forward again. Something in her chest wound tight for days, loosened a fraction. "Thank you," she said, "for being angry. For being angry at the right person." Noah was in the yard doing something complicated with a length of rope that he could not immediately explain in a way that made sense. Eli was sitting on the porch step, reading a book he held upside down, which he reversed with enormous dignity the moment he realized he had been caught. Clara stood in front of them and looked at them and breathed. "You came," Eli said. He was already getting up. "I said I would." "You said Saturday." "It's Thursday." "I know." He hugged her. "I'm not complaining." Noah came from the yard and stood nearby in the way 11-year-olds stand when they want to be included, but have decided they are too old to run at people. Clara reached out and pulled him in anyway, and he let her, which was its own kind of admission. Nathan stood to the side, giving them room, doing the thing he was quietly expert at, being present without demanding to be noticed. After a minute, Noah looked up and said, "You drove her yourself." Nathan looked at him. "I did." "Why?" "Because she asked to come, and I had nothing more important to do." Noah considered this with the gravity of someone filing it under evidence. "Walter was here yesterday," he said. Clara went still. She felt Nathan go still beside her. "What did he say?" she asked. "He said he had some business to sort out with you. Something about papers." Noah's eyes moved between Clara and Nathan. "He seemed, I don't know, not mad exactly, but something." He frowned. He kept looking around the house, like he was checking something. "Did he touch anything?" Nathan asked. Noah looked at him sharply. "Like what?" "Anything. Papers, books, anything in the drawers." Noah's face did something complicated. "He went into the kitchen for a glass of water. I didn't follow him because—" He stopped. "Because," Clara said, "because something felt wrong about him, and I didn't want to be alone in a room with him." He said it plainly with a child's unflinching honesty. "Is that bad?" "No," Clara said. "That is exactly right. Your instincts are exactly right." Nathan looked at the house. "Did your parents ever keep documents in the kitchen? Papers, letters?" Clara stared at him. "The bread tin." Nathan looked at her. "My mother kept important papers in the bread tin. She thought it was safe because nobody reasonable would look there." Clara was already moving toward the house. "I never moved them after she died. I didn't know what half of them were." She went through the kitchen door fast, and Nathan was right behind her, and Noah was behind him, and Eli came in last, crowding in the doorway with the alert attention of someone who has understood that this moment is important, even if he can't say exactly why. Clara went straight to the bread tin on the shelf. She lifted the lid. Empty. She stared at it. Not empty the way. Something is empty when it has always been empty. Empty the way something is empty when it has been emptied. The smell of the papers was still there, that faint dry smell of old ink and folded pages that had been in that tin for years. Walter had taken them. She turned around. Nathan was watching her face. "He took them," she said. "Yes. Those were my mother's papers, letters, records she kept." Her voice was steady, but something behind it was shaking. "Things I didn't even know the value of." "He knew," Nathan said quietly. "Which means Greer was right. He is being careful. He's cleaning up." "He thinks he can clean it up," Clara said. Her jaw was set. "He thinks if he takes the documents he can make it disappear. Make it so there's nothing left to prove what he did." "Can he?" Noah asked from the doorway. He was watching her with those serious dark eyes that had always been older than his face. Clara looked at her brother. Her 9-year-old Eli and her 11-year-old Noah standing in the kitchen of the house where they had grown up. The house that should have been more of a home than it was, the house where a man they were supposed to trust had been walking in and out for years, taking things that never belonged to him. "No," she said. "He cannot." She said it with a certainty she had not entirely verified yet, but she intended to make it true. On the drive back to the ranch, Clara was quiet for a long time. Nathan let her be. The road was cold and straight, and the horses moved at an easy pace, and the sky above them was beginning to lose its light along the western edge. "He's going to move on the boys next," she said. "That's what comes after the documents. When someone starts to feel cornered, they go for the thing that gives them the most leverage. She looked at Nathan. My brothers are the most leverage. I know, Nathan said. He's their legal guardian. He could take them somewhere, move them, make it harder for us to. He won't, Nathan said. How do you know? Because I spoke with Greer about this 2 days ago, before the note. He kept his eyes on the road. We filed a petition. Quiet. Through a judge in the next county, not here, where Walter has connections. A petition to review the guardianship arrangement on grounds of financial misconduct. Clara stared at him. You did that 2 days ago, she said. Yes. Without telling me. He glanced at her. I was going to tell you tonight. Nathan. I know. I should have told you immediately. He paused. I didn't want to raise your hopes before I knew the judge would hear it. Will he hear it? He will. He told Greer he would review it within the week. Nathan's hands adjusted on the reins, a small controlled movement. Walter cannot move the boys out of the county while the petition is under review. It's a legal hold. He may not even know it's been filed yet. Clara sat with this. The specific sensation of someone doing something that protects you without being asked, the disorientation of it, the gratitude of it, the complicated mixture of relief and the instinct to have been included in the decision. I need you to tell me things, she said. When you do things like this, I need to know. You're right, he said. No deflection, no justification, just you're right. I'm not angry, she said. I need to be part of this. It's my family. It's our family, he said quietly. She looked at him. He was looking at the road, his profile steady against the fading sky. Our family. He had said it without drama, without apparent awareness of the weight of it, the way you say something when it has already settled into your understanding as true, and you are simply reporting it. Clara looked forward again. She did not argue with it, because she found sitting on that wagon on that cold road that she did not want to. They were 4 days into the waiting. 4 days of ordinary life laid over an extraordinary tension. 4 days of bread and horses and Lily's hair and Nathan's quiet presence and Greer's silence that meant he was working when the letter arrived. It was addressed to Clara, in Walter's handwriting. She recognized it before she opened it. His penmanship was neat and controlled the handwriting of a man who understood that appearances are a form of argument. She sat at the kitchen table and held it and looked at it for a moment. Nathan came in from outside, read her face, and sat down across from her. She opened it. She read it once, folded it, set it on the table. He wants to meet, she said. Where? The sheriff's office. 3 days from now. He says he has documents he wants to present. Something about the original agreement between my parents and his arrangement of the marriage. She pressed her fingertips to the table. He's framing it as a family conversation. It's not a family conversation, Nathan said. No, it's a warning. She looked up. He knows we're building something. He wants to get ahead of it. Whatever he's going to present in that sheriff's office, it's meant to look like the evidence against him is actually evidence against us. Nathan looked at the folded letter. What do you want to do? I want to call Greer, she said. Today. Right now. She stood up. And I want to know exactly what we have and what we don't have before we walk into that room. Nathan was already standing. Chefe. Greer came that evening, arriving as the sun went down, and they sat around the study table for 2 hours while he laid out what he had. It was not everything, but it was enough. There were bank records, not from Walter's bank, where he would have controlled the access, but from a smaller institution 2 towns over, where he had moved money intermittently over years, apparently believing that distance would provide cover. There were 2 signed documents with what appeared to be Clara's father's signature, witnessed by Walter himself, which Greer explained carefully was legally problematic on its face, a creditor witnessing his own debtor's signature on a debt agreement. There was a letter from a man named Preston Cole, a land agent in the next county, referencing a transaction Walter had made using money he had described in the letter as coming from a family estate he managed. The Whitmore family had never owned land in the next county. That money had come from somewhere else. And then there was the thing Greer set on the table last, with the particular care of a man handling something explosive. This, he said, is a property deed, filed 4 years ago. It transfers a 20-acre parcel land, your grandfather homesteaded land that should have passed to your father's estate. It transfers that parcel to Walter Hayes for the sum of $1. The room was silent. $1, Clara said. $1, Greer said. The deed is signed, but the witness signature. He turned the document to face her. Can you tell me if you recognize that signature? Clara looked at it, her chest contracted. That's my mother's signature, she said. Are you certain? I grew up watching her write. I know exactly how she made her letters. Clara looked up at Greer. But my mother would never have signed this willingly. She talked about that land her whole life. She said it was the only thing her own father left them that meant something. Her voice was very controlled. She would never have sold it for any amount, let alone $1. Greer nodded slowly. Which raises the question of whether this signature was obtained under duress, under deception, or, he paused, or whether it was obtained at all. You think it's forged, Nathan said. I think it's worth a very close examination, Greer said carefully. And I think that if it is, then what Walter Hayes has done goes considerably beyond financial mismanagement. The word hung in the room unsaid, but understood by everyone at the table. Fraud. Criminal fraud. The kind that does not end with paying back what you owe. The kind that ends somewhere considerably darker than that. Clara sat very still. She thought about her mother. Working. Always working. Washing and sewing and doing without, always doing without, and never quite understanding why it never seemed to be enough. Dying without understanding. Dying thinking she had simply been unlucky, simply been poor, simply been the kind of person the world did not protect. She had not been unlucky. She had been robbed. Clara put both hands flat on the table. She felt Nathan looking at her. She felt Greer carefully not looking at her, giving her the privacy of the moment. What do we need? She said. Her voice was so quiet it was almost not a voice. To prove this. Everything. What do we need? I need 3 more days, Greer said. I have a documents examiner coming from the city, someone who can look at the signature, and I have 2 more institutions I need to contact. He looked at her steadily. Clara, what Walter has done, if it is what I believe it is, this will not end quietly. This will be public. The town will know everything. Good, Clara said. Greer blinked. The town already has a version of the story, Clara said. Walter made sure of that. They think I'm a calculating girl who married for money. They think Nathan is a fool who got used. She looked at the forged deed on the table. I want them to have the true version, all of it. I want there to be no version of events that Walter Hayes can shape or shade or present at a friendly sheriff's office to get ahead of us. She looked at Greer. Can you be ready in 3 days? Greer looked at Nathan. Nathan said nothing. He was watching Clara. Yes, Greer said. I can be ready in 3 days. Then so can we, Clara said. The next 2 days were the strangest Clara had experienced since arriving at Caldwell Ranch. On the surface, everything continued normally. She made meals. She helped Lily with her reading. She tended to the kitchen garden plans that had been suspended and now felt more necessary than ever, as though committing to the spring was a statement she needed to make. She rode out with Nathan twice to check the fence lines on the north pasture, and they talked about cattle and weather and the price of feed, and also about nothing at all, and both kinds of conversation felt equally necessary. But underneath all of it, she was building something. She was going back through every memory she had of Walter in her childhood home. Every visit. Every conversation she had overheard between him and her parents. Every time her mother had said something that Clara had not understood at the time. Small things, half-formed worries, the kind of thing adults say in front of children when they forget that children are listening. She was making a list, not on paper. In her head, where Walter could not get to it. She was also watching the ranch hands without appearing to watch them. One of them, a quiet man named Dobbs, who had worked at Caldwell Ranch for 7 years, had been in town more than usual this week. Clara noticed because she noticed everything. She said nothing because she had not yet decided what it meant. On the second night, she couldn't sleep. She got up and went downstairs the way she had the night she found the unlocked door, and she sat at the kitchen table in the dark and went through everything Greer had laid out in her mind, looking for the gaps, looking for the places where Walter's version of events could still find purchase. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Nathan came in, also apparently unable to sleep, and looked at her sitting in the dark without visible surprise, because by now they had both established that neither of them was the kind of person who slept well when there were unresolved things in the world. He sat down across from her. He did not ask what she was thinking. She did not explain. They sat in the dark together for a while. Then Clara said, "Dobbs has been going to town." Nathan went still. "I noticed," he said carefully. "How long?" "A week, maybe 10 days. "And you didn't tell me." "I didn't know if it was relevant." "Is he loyal to you?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, the length of a moment that means "I thought so" rather than yes. "He's been here 7 years," Nathan said. "He's never given me reason to doubt him." "Walter doesn't buy loyalty," Clara said. "He rents it. He finds people who have something they need, and he fills the need just enough to get what he wants." She looked at Nathan. "Does Dobbs have something he needs?" Another pause. Longer. "His brother has debts," Nathan said quietly. "Bar debts mostly. I knew about it. I had planned to speak to him about—" "Walter found him first," Clara said. Nathan sat back in his chair. "We don't know that," he said. But it was the voice of a man who has already concluded something and is being careful about saying so. "We need to know what Dobbs has told him," Clara said. "How much he knows about Greer's investigation, about the petition, about the documents we have." She pressed her fingers together. "If Walter walks into that room in 3 days knowing exactly what we have, then he'll have an answer for all of it," Nathan finished. They looked at each other across the dark kitchen table. "I'll speak to Dobbs in the morning," Nathan said. "No," Clara said. "Let me." Nathan looked at her. "He'll be defensive with you," she said. "You're his employer. The conversation will feel like an accusation." She met his eyes. "With me, it can feel like something else." "Like what?" "Like an opportunity," she said. "Walter rents loyalty with what people need. I can offer him something better, the chance to do the right thing and have it mean something." Nathan studied her. "You're going to give him a way out." "I'm going to give him a way through," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at her for a long moment. "When did you learn to think like this?" he asked. "When I had to," she said simply. She found Dobbs in the stable the next morning, earlier than the other hands, doing exactly what she had expected. A man with something on his conscience tends to give himself extra work, so there is less space for the conscience to operate. She went in and leaned against the stall across from where he was working and said, "Dobbs, I need to talk to you." He looked up. He was maybe 40, weathered, with the careful face of a man who has learned not to show much. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said. "You know what I'm going to say," she said. Not a question. He worked for another moment, then he stopped working. "He came to me 3 weeks ago," Dobbs said. He did not look at her. Said he just wanted to know how things were going out here, how Mr. Caldwell was doing, whether things seemed settled. A pause. "He mentioned my brother's debts." "Of course he did," Clara said. "I didn't tell him anything important," Dobbs said quickly. "I told him I said things were fine out here. That was it." "Did you tell him about Arthur Greer's visits?" A long pause. "He asked if Mr. Caldwell had brought in any outside help," Dobbs said. "I said there had been a lawyer out. I didn't know what for." Clara nodded. She kept her voice even. "Dobbs, I'm going to tell you something and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." She waited until he looked at her. "Walter Hayes has been stealing from my family for years, my whole life. My parents worked themselves to death and never understood why they couldn't get ahead. And the reason was Walter skimming and stealing and forging and using the law as a cover for what was just plain theft." She held his gaze. "What he asked you to do, spy on this ranch report back to him, he didn't ask you because he needed information. He asked you because he wants to know what we have so he can destroy it before we use it. And if he succeeds, he will walk away from everything he has done without consequence. And my brothers who are 11 and 9 years old will continue to live under the guardianship of a man who has been stealing from their family since before they were born." Dobbs was very still. "Now," Clara said, "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to report you to Nathan and have you dismissed. What you told Walter has already been told, that can't be undone." She paused. "But what happens in 3 days when we go to that sheriff's office has not been decided yet, and what you do between now and then will matter." Dobbs looked at the floor. "What do you want from me?" he asked. His voice was low, rough. "I want to know exactly what you told Walter," Clara said. "Everything, so we know what he knows and what he doesn't." She waited. "And I want you to think very carefully about what kind of man you want to be when this is over." The stable was quiet. One of the horses shifted. Light moved through the gap above the door. Dobbs looked up at her. "He knows about Greer," he said. "He knows you have documents. He knows about the petition for the boys." He paused. "He asked me if you had the bread tin." Clara closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. "And you told him?" "I told him I didn't know anything about a bread tin," Dobbs said, "because I didn't. But the way he asked..." He stopped. "He already knew about it. He just wanted to know if you did too." "He'd already taken what was in it," Clara said. "It seemed that way." She opened her eyes. She looked at this man who had done a wrong thing for a reason she understood, because people in difficult circumstances make wrong choices all the time, and most of them are not bad people, just people who ran out of good options and reached for the nearest thing. "What's your brother's debt?" she asked. He told her the number. It was not small. It was also by the standards of what she had come to understand about Caldwell Ranch and Nathan's quiet generosity, not insurmountable. "Tell me everything Walter asked you," she said. "Every question, every answer you gave, everything he said about what he was planning. Leave nothing out." She pushed off the stall. "And when you've told me all of it, you go and you tell Nathan yourself, before I do, because that's how you start making this right." Dobbs looked at her for a long moment. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He told her everything, and everything was in fact more than she had expected. Because Walter had not just been asking about documents and lawyers. Walter had been doing what Walter always did when he felt cornered. He had been preparing a story. A specific, detailed, devastatingly plausible story about how Nathan Caldwell had manipulated a poor, naive girl, used her uncle's financial troubles as leverage, and constructed a fraudulent marriage to protect a land inheritance he had no legal right to claim. Walter was not going to come to that meeting in 3 days with a defense. He was going to come with an offense. And the story he had built was not made of whole cloth. It was made of real pieces, real facts, real documents arranged in a sequence that looked entirely different from the truth, but was technically supported by evidence. It was, Clara thought, walking back to the house with Dobbs's entire confession, organized in her mind, one of the most elegant pieces of deception she had ever encountered. And she had exactly 3 days to take it apart. She went inside. She went directly to the study. She sat down at Nathan's desk and took out a piece of paper and began writing. Not in the careful, legible hand she used for letters, but fast, her own shorthand, the way she had always written when something needed to get out of her head and onto a surface she could look at. Nathan appeared in the doorway. "Dobbs came to find me," he said. "Good. He told me everything." "Good. Clara." His voice brought her up from the page. She looked at him. His expression was tight controlled, the expression of a man who is very angry and has it under very firm management. "What Walter is planning to do." "I know," she said. "He's going to walk in there and make it look like I know," she said again. "And we are not going to let him." She looked back at the page. "Nathan, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to tell me exactly without leaving anything out, because I need every piece of the truth we have." She looked up. "Why did your grandfather put the marriage clause in the inheritance? The real reason. Not the legal language. The reason." Nathan was quiet. "Because," he said slowly, "my grandfather did not trust bankers or courts or documents. He believed that a man alone will take risks that a man with a family will not. He believed that land needed to be held by someone who had something to lose beyond himself. He paused. He wanted the ranch to go to someone with roots, not just wealth. Clara nodded. She wrote it down. "And your lawyers," she said. "The ones who found the argument that kept the ranch from reverting after you lost Eleanor and James. Who are they?" "Stillman and Colby. Are they better than Greer?" Nathan blinked. "Different kind of practice. They specialize in, can you get them here by tomorrow?" A pause. "Probably." "Get them here," Clara said. "Because what we have with Greer is the offensive case against Walter. What I need from Stillman and Colby is the defensive case for you. For the inheritance. For the marriage." She looked up from the paper. "Walter is going to try to fight on two fronts simultaneously. He's going to try to make you look fraudulent while making himself look like the victim. If we let him control the terrain, we lose." She held Nathan's gaze. "But if we walk into that room 3 days from now, with both sides locked down our case against him and the legal foundation of everything he's trying to undermine, then we're not defending," Nathan said slowly. "We're not defending," Clara confirmed. "We're ending it." He looked at her across the study. At this woman who had arrived at his ranch 2 months ago with a small bag and her mother's ring, and her eyes pointed at the floor. Who had asked for nothing, refused to want anything, and spent weeks quietly learning everything she needed to know. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Clara looked back at her paper. "Everything you know about Walter Hayes," she said, "and the names of every family in this county he has ever done business with." Nathan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. And they worked through the night. They worked until 2 in the morning. Clara filled 4 pages. Nathan talked, and she wrote, and sometimes she stopped him to ask him to go back to be more specific, to give her a name or a date or a number, because details were the difference between a story and a case, and what they were building had to be a case. By the time the candles had burned down to nothing and Nathan got up to light new ones, they had something that looked spread across the desk in Clara's handwriting, like the skeleton of a thing that could actually stand up in a room and hold its weight. 3 other families, Clara said, looking at the pages. "The Hennessy family, the Pierces, and old Mr. Dunbar." "That we know of," Nathan said. "That we know of," she agreed. She picked up the page with the names. "Walter managed accounts for all of them at some point. Offered his services the way he did with my family. A helpful relation, a trusted connection. Someone who understood finance and was willing to help." She set the page down. "And in every case, the family ended up worse than they started. The Hennessy's lost 20 acres, Nathan said. His voice had gone flat with the specific flatness of someone reciting facts they are furious about. "They blamed the drought. Everyone blamed the drought. Was there a drought? A dry year, not a ruin a family year." He sat back. "I sent them supplies because I thought they'd had bad luck. I didn't know." Clara looked at him. "You've been quietly compensating for things Walter did to people without knowing Walter was the cause." Nathan rubbed the back of his neck. "Apparently." "That is—" She stopped, looked for the right word. "That is maddening." "Yes. And also—" She stopped again. "Also what?" She shook her head slightly. Not dismissing the thought, just keeping it, because what she was thinking was that the man sitting across from her had been, without knowing it, doing precisely what a decent person would do in a community riddled with a quiet parasite, trying to hold things together, trying to fill the gaps, trying to make sure people had enough, and the cause of the damage had been attending family dinners and clapping men on the back at the general store the whole time. "We need the Hennessys," she said instead, "and the Pierces, and Dunbar if he's well enough to speak to it. Their testimony, even informal, even just a statement to Greer, changes the shape of what we bring into that room." "They may not want to come forward," Nathan said. "People don't like admitting they were taken." "No," Clara said. "But people also don't like knowing the person who took them is still walking free and going to do it to someone else." She looked up. "Which one of them do you think would be most willing to talk?" Nathan thought for a moment. "Tom Pierce," he said. "His wife has been angry about the land business for 2 years. She never believed it was just bad luck. Can you ride to the Pierce place tomorrow morning? Yes. Don't tell them everything. Just ask if they'd be willing to speak to Greer. Tell them it's important. Tell them it involves Walter Hayes. Nathan looked at her. You think that'll be enough? If Mary Pierce is as angry as you say, Clara said yes. Nathan looked at the pages spread across his desk. 2 months ago, this desk had held ranch accounts and nothing else. Now it held the architecture of something that was either going to bring Walter Hayes down entirely, or if they had miscalculated, anywhere collapse under them instead. Get some sleep, Clara said. She started gathering the pages into a careful stack. We have 2 days. We can't afford to do any of this wrong. Nathan watched her organize the papers. Clara, she looked up. Are you afraid? He asked. She considered the question honestly, the way she always considered things. Yes, she said, but not of Walter. She tapped the stack of pages straight on the desk. I'm afraid of what he might have taken that we can't find. Documents that don't exist anymore. Evidence he's already buried. She looked at Nathan. The things he took from the bread tin. Greer's documents examiner arrives tomorrow. I know, but the examiner can only examine what we have. Walter had years to shape this. We have 2 days. She stood up. That's what frightens me. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, When I was 23, I lost everything. Not to Walter, to a different kind of man, a different kind of theft, but the same essential thing. Men who understood that the law could be used as a weapon if you knew how to hold it. He looked at his hands on the desk. I spent 3 years rebuilding from nothing. And the thing that got me through was not rage, though I had plenty of that. It was being absolutely clear about what I could control and what I couldn't, what I had and what I didn't. He looked at her. You already know the difference, Clara. You've always known it. That's not the same as weakness. She stood at the desk and looked at him, and felt something she had been holding at arm's length for weeks, some final reservation, some last protective distance, give way quietly, like ice at the edge of a river that has been loosening for days and finally lets go. How did you do it? She asked. Rebuild. After losing everything. I stopped trying to get back what was gone, he said. I started building what I actually wanted. She picked up the stack of papers, held them against her chest. Good night, Nathan, she said. Good night, Clara. She went upstairs. She set the papers on her dresser. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hands together and stayed very still for a long moment. Then she lay down. And for the first time since Greer's warning note had arrived, she slept. Greer's documents examiner was a small woman named Helen Marsh, who arrived the next morning from the city with a leather case of instruments and the calm authority of someone who had spent 30 years being the smartest person in every room she entered and had stopped feeling the need to announce it. She sat with the forged deed for 40 minutes while Nathan and Clara waited in the parlor and did not speak to each other, which was its own form of communication. Then Helen Marsh came out of the study, set the deed on the parlor table and said, The signature was traced. Clara stared at her. Traced? Over an original signature on a different document. Almost certainly your mother's signature on something she actually signed, something Walter had access to. The pressure patterns are wrong for a signature written naturally. The ink distribution suggests the pen moved slowly and deliberately, not with the fluency of normal handwriting. She folded her hands. In my professional opinion, this deed was signed by Walter Hayes, using your mother's hand as a template. The parlor was absolutely silent. Can you testify to that? Nathan asked. In any court in this state, Helen Marsh said. Clara looked at the deed on the table. At her mother's name, Margaret Whitmore, written in ink that was not her mother's movement, not her mother's choice, but the shape of her hand stolen and used to steal from her. Thank you, Clara said. Her voice came from somewhere very controlled. Thank you, Ms. Marsh. The examiner nodded. She went back to the study to write her formal report. Clara stood up and walked to the window and stood with her back to the room. Nathan did not say anything. He came and stood near her, not touching, just near the way he always was when something was too large for words. After a moment, Clara said, She signed things her whole life without understanding what they meant. My mother. She trusted him with the paperwork because she was never comfortable with documents, and he was family, and family was supposed to help. Her voice was perfectly steady. She signed a letter of appreciation to the bank one year. She told me about it. She was so proud she said Walter had helped her draft it, and she'd signed it herself. She was proud she could help with the banking. A pause. He probably used that letter. Probably, Nathan said quietly. She died thinking she had failed us, Clara said. She thought she hadn't been careful enough with money, hadn't been smart enough, hadn't worked hard enough. She died apologizing to me for leaving us with so little. Her jaw was tight. She had nothing to apologize for. Nathan's hand came to rest on the window frame beside her. Not on her beside her. Present. No, he said. She didn't. Clara breathed in. Breathed out. He doesn't get to walk away from this, she said. He won't, Nathan said. She turned around. Her eyes were dry. Her expression was the clearest he had ever seen it. All the careful protective distance burned away, leaving something underneath that was not hardness, but was related to it. The quality a thing has when it has been tested repeatedly and has not broken. Let's go over everything one more time, she said. From the beginning. Nathan came back from the Pierce farm by noon. He walked in the door, and Clara looked at his face and knew before he said anything. Mary Pierce, he said, has been keeping records. Clara straightened. 2 years of records, he said. He was still holding his coat. Every transaction she could piece together, every date, every amount she believed they were owed. She kept them in a box under her kitchen floor because she did not trust banks or lawyers or any room that Walter Hayes had ever walked through. He set his coat down. She gave the whole box to Greer. She gave it to Greer today. I brought Greer with me. He's still out there. Nathan looked at her. Clara, Mary Pierce's records overlap with some of what we have, but they also show 3 transactions we had no knowledge of. Land transfers that connect Walter to a man named Cartwright in the next county. A land agent. Clara went very still. Preston Cole mentioned a land agent. The letter Greer found. Cartwright, she said. Not Cole. Different agent. Same pattern. Nathan's voice was tight. Walter has been running this in multiple counties, Clara, for years. The Whitmores were not the only family. The Pierces were not the only family. This is... He stopped. This is significantly larger than we thought. The room absorbed this. Does Greer know? Clara asked. He's looking at Mary's records now. Nathan finally put his coat on the hook by the door with the slightly mechanical movement of a man whose mind is somewhere else entirely. He said to tell you, and I'm giving you his exact words, he said tell her, we just went from a local dispute to something the state attorney is going to want to hear about. Clara sat down. Not from weakness. From the need to think with her feet on the ground. She put both hands flat on the table and looked at them and worked through it. Walter going county to county, finding families with limited legal knowledge, offering his services as a trusted connection, using the apparatus of ordinary business signed documents, witnessed agreements, property transfers to systematically strip people of what they owned. Not once, not twice. A pattern, a practice, a career. He's done this his whole life, she said. This is what he does. Yes, Nathan said. And we have how much of it can we prove as of right now? Enough, Nathan said. Greer said enough. For our case for the boys for what happens in that room tomorrow we have enough. And the larger case the state attorney. That takes longer. But it starts here. It starts with us. He sat down across from her. Tomorrow is about Eli and Noah and your family and this county. The rest Walter answers for the rest afterward. Clara nodded. She picked up the pen she had been using all day. She looked at her notes. Then tomorrow we focus, she said. Our case, our family. We don't overreach. We walk in with exactly what we need, and not one thing more, because if we try to present everything, he'll find a way to make it look like excess. Like persecution. Greer said the same thing, Nathan said. Greer is right. She looked up. What time do Stillman and Colby arrive? They rode in an hour ago. They're in the study with the inheritance documents now. Good. She stood. I need to speak with them. Clara. He caught her hand as she passed. Not tightly, just caught it. She stopped and looked down at his hand holding hers, and then up at his face. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, I want you to know. He stopped, tried again. When this is over, when Walter is dealt with and the boys are free and all of this is resolved, I want to ask you something. She looked at him. Ask me now. He shook his head slightly. Not now. After. His thumb moved once across the back of her hand. After, when you're choosing freely and not in the middle of a fight. She understood. He was giving her the same thing he had given her from the beginning. A choice that was actually a choice made in clear air, not in the thick of necessity. All right, she said. After. She went to the study. The night before the meeting, Clara did not sleep. She lay in her room and stared at the ceiling and ran through every sequence of events she could imagine. Every move Walter might make, every piece of paper he might produce, every version of the story he had been building for weeks carefully, the way he built everything using real materials arranged to show a false picture. She thought about what Dobbs had told her. Walter knew about Greer. Walter knew about the petition for the boys. Walter knew they had documents, though not which ones, and not about Helen Marsh's findings. He did not know about Mary Pierce's records. That was the thing he did not know. And the thing you don't know is the thing that undoes you. At 4 in the morning, she got up and wrote one more letter. Not to Greer, not to any lawyer. A letter to Sheriff Alderman, not the deputy. Walter had coffee with, but the sheriff himself, a man she had never spoken to, but who Nathan had described simply as honest. She wrote it carefully, 3 paragraphs, and sealed it, and put it with the stack of documents she would carry into that room. She was downstairs making coffee when Nathan appeared at 5:30. He looked at her face. You didn't sleep. Neither did you. He conceded this with a slight tilt of his head. He poured his own coffee and sat down. Lily asked me last night if everything was going to be all right, he said. Clara wrapped her hands around her cup. What did you tell her? I told her I had a feeling it was. Do you have a feeling? He looked at her steadily. Yes. She looked at him. Why? Because, he said, I've never seen anyone prepare the way you prepare, and I've seen a lot of people go into difficult rooms. He drank his coffee. You don't leave gaps. She almost smiled. I leave some gaps. Name one. She thought about it. I don't know what he's going to say about the marriage, about why you agreed to it, your original reason, the inheritance clause. That's the gap. He's going to stand up in that room and he's going to say, Nathan Caldwell needed a wife, and a poor girl's uncle was willing to supply one, and everything that looks like kindness was actually calculation. She set her cup down. And the problem is that he's going to use facts to do it. Real facts. The inheritance clause is real. The arrangement is real. The facts he uses, Nathan said quietly, are true. But they're not the whole truth. No, they're not. She looked at him. So you need to tell the whole truth. I intend to. All of it. Including... She paused. Including what you told me that first night. What you said about knowing I had no choice. What you said about deserving a choice. She held his gaze. You need to say that in that room. Exactly as you said it to me. He was quiet. It matters, she said. Not just for the legal case. For the people in that room who have heard Walter's version of this story for weeks. They need to hear yours. He nodded once. All right. And Nathan. She waited until he looked at her directly. Whatever happens in there, however it goes, I need you to know that I... She stopped. Found the words. I came here because I had no choice, but I would choose it. If I could go back and choose, I would choose it. The kitchen was very quiet. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. And the way he said it, not thank you, not a deflection. Just I know with a certainty that meant it had not been in doubt, made something in her chest settle into a place it had never quite been before. She picked up her cup. He picked up his. And they sat in the early morning quiet together, two people who had spent months becoming something to each other that neither of them had planned, waiting for the day to begin. Chaw. The sheriff's office in Willow Creek was a single large room with wooden benches along the walls and a desk at the front where Sheriff Alderman sat with the unhurried solidity of a man who had been doing his job long enough to have seen most things and been surprised by very few of them. The room was fuller than Clara had expected. She had not anticipated that. She had pictured a small controlled meeting, both sides their lawyers, the sheriff. But Willow Creek was a small town, and small towns did not keep their business private. And somehow the word had gone around that something significant was happening at the sheriff's office this morning, and people had come. Margaret Hollis was there, which Clara had half expected. The minister and his wife. Two of the men from the feed store. A woman Clara recognized as Tom Pierce's sister. And in the back corner, quiet and straight-backed, Mary Pierce herself, with a look on her face, like someone who has been waiting a long time to be in a particular room. Walter was already seated when they came in. He was dressed well. He was always dressed well, which was one of his tools. The appearance of prosperity as a form of credibility. He had two men with him, a local lawyer named Gibbs, and a man Clara did not recognize who carried a leather folder with the professional air of someone brought in specifically for his folder. Walter looked at Clara when she came in. He smiled. It was the same smile he had worn in her kitchen the morning of her wedding, pleasant, controlled, carrying nothing good underneath. She looked at him for exactly 1 second, and then looked away, because she would not spend her attention on him before the room required it. She sat beside Nathan. Greer sat on her other side. Stillman from the city sat next to Nathan. Between them on the bench, they had a neat, organized stack of documents that represented weeks of work and a lifetime of wrongs waiting to be named. Sheriff Alderman looked around the room. He had received Clara's letter at 6 that morning. She had sent Dobbs with it before dawn. He had sent a reply with Dobbs that said only "I'll be there." Alderman. He looked at it now the way he looked at the whole room, steadily, without apparent opinion. "All right," he said. "Mr. Hayes requested this meeting. Mr. Hayes, you'll start." Walter stood. He had the manner of a man who enjoyed standing in rooms. "Thank you, Sheriff. I'll try to be brief." He looked around with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to performing concern. "I requested this meeting because I'm worried. Worried about my niece Clara, whom most of you know or knew before recent circumstances changed things." A pause that was not a pause, it was a technique. "I want to be clear that I have no ill will toward Nathan Caldwell. He is a respected man in this community. But I believe, and I have documentation to support this, that the arrangement he made with my niece was not what it appeared to be." He opened his folder. He began to speak. And Clara sat and listened, and she was almost impressed. Because Walter was good at this. Genuinely good. He laid it out with the precision of someone who had been rehearsing for weeks, which he had. The inheritance clause. The timeline of the marriage arrangement. His own role framed as a protective uncle trying to find his niece a safe situation. Nathan's apparent urgency in completing the arrangement quickly. The speed of it all. The lack of formal courtship. The disparity in circumstances. He made it sound like Nathan had purchased a wife, and Clara had been too desperate and too naive to understand the transaction she was entering. And the room listened. And Clara could feel the listening, the shift in attention, the slight lean of people toward Walter's voice, the specific quality of attention that people give to a story that confirms something they already half believed. She felt Nathan's hand on the bench beside her very still. She did not touch it, but she noted it. Walter produced the marriage agreement. He produced a letter referencing the inheritance clause from Nathan's own lawyer, not Greer, but the previous lawyer, Stillman's predecessor. He produced a document that purported to show Nathan's urgency in finalizing the arrangement before the end of the legal quarter. It was as she had thought in the dark the night before, elegantly done. And then Walter said, "I believe my niece deserves better than to be a legal instrument, and I believe this community deserves to know the truth about the arrangements being made by men of power at the expense of women who have no other options." He sat down. The room was quiet. Sheriff Alderman looked at Nathan. "Mr. Caldwell, your response." Nathan stood. I was not a man who performed. He did not look around the room the way Walter had, working the audience, calibrating the effect. He stood and he looked at the sheriff, and he spoke the way he did everything, directly and without decoration. "Everything Mr. Hayes just said about the inheritance clause is true," he said. "The clause exists. My grandfather wrote it. I needed to meet it." A murmur in the room. Walter's expression of sympathetic concern did not change, but something behind his eyes moved with satisfaction. "What Mr. Hayes did not say," Nathan continued, "is that he came to me with this arrangement while deliberately concealing the fact that he was the one pressuring my wife to agree to it. He told me he was offering Clara an opportunity. He did not tell me he was the one who created the circumstances that made her feel she had no choice." Nathan's voice was even, unhurried. "When I realized what he had done before the wedding, not after, I had two options. I could withdraw from the arrangement and leave Clara and her brothers in a situation that Walter Hayes had manufactured and intended to use against them. Or I could go forward and try to give her something better than what he had planned for her." He paused. "The first night my wife arrived at this ranch," Nathan said, "I told her she was not a payment for someone else's debt. I told her she was a person who deserved a choice. I told her she had her own room, her own key, the freedom to come and go, and that if she ever decided the arrangement wasn't something she could live with, we would find another way." He looked around the room for the first time, steady, not performing, just meeting eyes. "I want everyone in this room to understand what I am saying. The marriage was not a transaction in which I acquired a wife. It was an attempt by both of us to find a way through a situation that Walter Hayes had created. And if you want to know whether Clara came to this marriage freely, you should ask her." He sat down. A longer silence. Sheriff Alderman looked at Clara. "Mrs. Caldwell, do you have something to add?" Clara stood. She had been a shy girl her whole life. She had learned to make herself small, to keep her eyes down, to speak only when the cost of silence was greater than the cost of being heard. She had learned that lesson in Walter Hayes's kitchen, at the hands of a world that treated quiet girls as easier to use than loud ones. She was not that girl anymore. She looked at the room. She looked at Margaret Hollis, whose polite smile had gone careful. She looked at Mary Pierce in the corner, who was watching her with an expression like someone watching a fire they have been waiting for. She looked at Walter, who was looking at her with a confidence that was about to become something else entirely. "My name is Clara Whitmore Caldwell," she said. Her voice was clear, and it carried to every corner of the room. "I was 19 years old when my parents died. For 4 years after that, I kept my brothers alive by working every job I could find, because our family had very little money, and I could not understand why, no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough." She paused. "I understand now. It was never enough because Walter Hayes was taking it." The room changed. "I have here," she said, "a formal statement from Helen Marsh, a documents examiner from the city, certifying that the signature on a property deed, transferring 20 acres of Whitmore land to Walter Hayes, is a forgery. That the signature was traced from my mother's hand using a document she actually signed." She held up the statement. "My mother did not sell that land. It was taken from her." She placed the statement on the table in front of Sheriff Alderman. "I have bank records showing money moved from accounts in my family's name to accounts controlled by Walter Hayes over a period of 12 years. She placed the records. "I have a letter connecting Walter Hayes to 2 separate land agents in 2 separate counties, showing a pattern of the same methods used against my family being used against other families in this region." The letter went down. "I have a statement from Mary Pierce, who has been keeping her own records for 2 years." She looked at Mary Pierce. "Mrs. Pierce, would you like to add anything?" Mary Pierce stood up from the back bench. She was a broad-shouldered woman, with the look of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, and has finally set it down in a place where people can see it. $1,200, Mary Pierce said. "Over 8 years. I have every date and every amount in that box I gave to Arthur Greer this morning." She looked at Walter Hayes with an expression entirely free of performance. "My husband blamed himself. He thought he wasn't smart enough with money. He stopped sleeping right." She paused. It wasn't him. The room was very still. Walter's lawyer, Gibbs, put a hand on Walter's arm and said something close to his ear. Walter did not move. His expression had gone through several things in the last 90 seconds and had settled into something that was not quite the pleasant confidence it had been before. Something more managed, more careful, the expression of a man recalculating in real time. "Sheriff Alderman," Clara said. She reached into the stack and withdrew the last document. "This is a petition reviewed and approved 3 days ago by Judge Warren in the neighboring county requesting review of the guardianship of Eli and Noah Whitmore on grounds of financial misconduct by their current guardian." She set it on the table. "My brothers are 9 and 11 years old. They have been living under the guardianship of a man who has been systematically stealing from their family since before they were born. I am requesting that guardianship be transferred to me and my husband, and I am requesting that the evidence before you today be submitted for formal investigation by the appropriate authorities." She sat down. The room did not explode. It did something quieter and more devastating. It turned. The way a room turns when the weight of evidence shifts, and suddenly the person who had everyone's sympathy is the person everyone is looking at with new eyes. Walter stood up. "Sheriff," he said. His voice had lost something. Not its control, not yet, but a quality. The ease. "These are serious allegations. I would expect to have the opportunity to respond to each." "You'll have that opportunity," Sheriff Alderman said. He was looking at the documents on his desk with the careful attention of a man who had just understood that a meeting he had come to in the morning was going to take considerably longer than the morning. "Mr. Hayes, I'm going to need you to stay in town today. I'm going to need both parties to remain available while I review these materials with my deputy." He looked up. "And I'm going to be sending a telegram to Judge Warren this afternoon." Walter's lawyer put both hands flat on the table and began saying something about process and proper procedures and the rights of his client, and Sheriff Alderman listened to him with the patient expression of a man who has heard many lawyers say many things and makes his own judgments about what they mean. Clara sat beside Nathan and looked at her hands in her lap. Nathan leaned slightly toward her. "Are you all right?" he said very low, just for her. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. And she meant it fully and without qualification, for the first time since Walter had sat down in her kitchen and explained her options. It was not over. The legal process would take weeks, maybe months. The investigation into Walter's activities across multiple counties would take longer. There would be hearings and depositions, and the slow grinding machinery of official justice that never moved at the speed that felt adequate to the size of the wrong. But the room had turned, and Walter Hayes, for the first time in Clara's living memory, looked like what he was. Not a protective uncle, not a helpful relation, not a respected member of a community. A man who had run out of road. They were outside on the street. Afterward, the meeting had been adjourned. Sheriff Alderman had kept Walter and his lawyer inside, and the townspeople had filed out with the particular charged quiet of people who had witnessed something significant and had not yet decided how to talk about it when Margaret Hollis appeared at Clara's elbow. Clara turned. Margaret looked different from the woman who had smiled over her gloves outside the milliner's shop 2 weeks ago. The smile was still there, but it was doing different work now. "Clara," she said, "I owe you an apology." Clara looked at her steadily. "I repeated things," Margaret said. "Things Walter told my husband. Things I repeated too." She stopped. "I should have been more careful about what I passed along as fact." "Yes," Clara said. "You should have." Margaret blinked. She had apparently expected a more gracious reception. "I accept your apology," Clara said. "And I hope in the future when a man tells you a story about a woman he has power over you, consider the possibility that she might have a different version." She nodded once. "Good morning, Mrs. Hollis." She walked away. Nathan, who had watched this exchange from 2 feet away, fell into step beside her. "That was direct," he said. "It needed to be." "It did?" he agreed. He was quiet for a moment. "Eli and Noah will hear what happened today. Walter will have to release the guardianship. Greer said it could take 2 weeks for the formal transfer." 2 weeks, Nathan said. They walked to the wagon. Nathan handed her up without making a production of it, just a steadying hand offered and accepted the easy motion of two people who had learned each other's rhythms. He climbed up, picked up the reins. I said I would ask you something, he said. After. Clara looked at him. This is after, he said. The street was busy around them. People moving, conversations beginning, the ordinary morning traffic of a town that had just had an extraordinary morning. None of it touched the particular stillness between them on that wagon seat. I know the marriage started as an arrangement, Nathan said. He was looking at the road ahead the way he often did when he said the most important things. I know you came because you had to. I know everything that brought you here was not chosen. He paused. I want to ask you to choose now. Not because I need you to. The inheritance is sorted, the legal questions are resolved. I want you to choose because... He stopped. Because, she said quietly. He looked at her then, directly. The way he had looked at her the first day she arrived on the porch, hat in hand, trying to understand who she was, but different now, because now he knew, and knowing made the looking something else entirely. Because the ranch is a better place with you in it, he said. Lily is better. I am better. And I think... A pause that was not hesitation, but something more careful than hesitation. I think you might be too. Clara looked at him. At this man who had given her a key to her own room and sent boots to a child he'd never met, and stayed up until 2 in the morning, helping her build a case that she could not have built alone, and told her quietly in a dark kitchen that they had a family. I chose weeks ago, she said. He looked at her. I just didn't say it, she said. Because you hadn't asked yet. Howe was quiet for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not the almost smile she had learned to look for, but the real thing. Rare and unhurried, and entirely his. He picked up the reins. Then let's go home, he said. Clara faced forward. Home. She turned the word over the way she turned her mother's ring on her finger. Not nervously, not as reassurance, but just to feel the weight of it. The solidity. The way a real thing feels when you hold it. The wagon moved. Behind them Willow Creek continued its morning. Somewhere in the sheriff's office, Walter Hayes was sitting across from Sheriff Alderman with his leather folder and his lawyer and the wreckage of the story he had been building for weeks. In front of them, the road ran straight and clear toward the ranch. Toward Lily, who would be waiting on the porch steps because she always waited when they had been gone. Toward Mrs. Garrett, who would have lunch ready because she always had lunch ready. Toward the kitchen garden that would be planted in spring. Toward the boys who would come on Saturday and who would within 2 weeks not have to leave again. Toward the life that neither of them had planned, that both of them had built anyway, together. The formal transfer of guardianship took 11 days. Clara knew because she counted every single one of them. Not obsessively, she was not a person who sat in corners marking time. She counted the way a person counts who has learned that the space between a thing being promised and a thing being done is exactly where promises go to die, and she was not going to let this one die. She followed up with Greer every 2 days. She sent a note to Judge Warren's office on day 7. She was, as Nathan said with something between admiration and amusement, relentless. I prefer thorough, she told him. You prefer results, he said. Same thing. He did not argue. On the morning of the 11th day, Greer rode out to the ranch himself. He did not send a note ahead. He simply appeared at the door, and when Clara opened it and saw his face, she knew. It's done, he said. She stood in the doorway and held onto the doorframe and breathed. The guardianship is transferred, Greer said. Effective today. Eli and Noah Whitmore are in the legal care of Clara and Nathan Caldwell. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. Judge Warren signed it this morning. Clara took the document. She looked at it. At her own name printed in the formal language of courts and law next to Nathan's. At her brother's names. At the date. Thank you, she said. Her voice was not entirely steady, and she did not try to make it so. Greer nodded. He was the man who understood when words were less than the moment required. He tipped his hat and got back on his horse and rode out the way he had come. Clara stood in the doorway holding the document. Nathan appeared behind her. He did not ask. He looked at her face and put his hand on her shoulder, and she reached up and covered his hand with hers, and they stood there for a moment in the doorway of the house that had become their home, holding on to what had just become real. Then Clara straightened. She folded the document carefully. She put it in the inside pocket of her jacket close to her chest. "I need to go get my brothers," she said. "Wagon's already hitched," Nathan said. She turned to look at him. "I was already getting his coat." Eli came out of the house before the wagon had fully stopped. He had apparently been watching from the window and had calculated the exact moment he could make it to the yard without technically running, which was a distinction he abandoned entirely in the last 10 feet. He hit Clara hard enough to make her step back. She grabbed him. She held on. "Is it real?" he said into her shoulder. "Is it actually real?" "It's real," she said. "You're coming home." Heimat, a sound that was not quite a word. She felt his whole body exhale a release of something that had been held very tightly for a very long time. The particular way children hold fear when they are trying to be brave about it and do not entirely succeed. Noah came out of the house more slowly. He was carrying the bag he had packed, which told Clara he had been packed and ready since the night before, possibly longer. He walked up to her and looked at her with those serious eyes. "Walter's gone?" he asked. "Walter is being dealt with," Clara said. "You don't have to think about Walter anymore." Noah looked at Nathan over Clara's shoulder. Some communication passed between them that Clara could not entirely read, the specific language that forms between a man and a boy who have spent time together around horses and have found each other to be what they hoped. "I finished the rope thing," Noah told Nathan. "The one you showed me." "Good," Nathan said. "You can show me when we get back." Noah nodded. He picked up his bag. Eli finally let go of Clara and looked up at her with red eyes and the expression of a child who has decided he is done being dignified about this. "Can I have a room near yours?" he asked. "You can have whatever room you want," Clara said. "Even the one with the big window. Especially that one." Eli looked at the wagon, then back at her. Then he climbed up with a speed and certainty that suggested this question of the room had been resolved in his mind weeks ago, and he had simply been waiting for permission to act on it. Clara looked at the house. At the ordinary, slightly shabby house where she had grown up, where her mother had worked until her hands were raw, where Walter had walked in and out for years, carrying things that did not belong to him. She had thought she might feel something particular standing here this last time. Grief, maybe, or anger, or some final complicated reckoning with everything that had happened inside those walls. What she felt was simpler than any of that. She felt finished. She turned and got in the wagon. "Ready?" Nathan asked. "Ready," she said. They drove home. It was Lily who noticed first that something had changed. Not about the boys coming she had known about that had in fact reorganized her room's shelf of books by height in what she described as preparation. A process Clara had watched with considerable affection. What Lily noticed 3 days after Eli and Noah arrived was something subtler. She came to find Clara in the kitchen on a Thursday morning and stood in the doorway watching her with the focused observation of a child who has decided to investigate something. "You're different," Lily said. Clara looked up from the bread she was making. "Different how?" Lily thought about this carefully. "You stopped waiting," she said. Clara's hand stilled in the dough. "Before." Lily said, "You always looked like you were waiting for something bad to happen. Like you were ready to run." She tilted her head. "You don't look like that anymore." Clara looked at this 8-year-old girl with her braided hair and her observational powers that would have unnerved most adults and her complete absence of any filter between what she thought and what she said. "You're very perceptive," Clara said. "I know," Lily said without any vanity whatsoever. "Uncle Nathan says I notice too much." "You notice exactly the right amount," Clara said. She looked back at the dough. "You're right, Lily. I was waiting. I think I've been waiting since I was about your age." She pressed her palms into the dough. "I'm done waiting." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that why you laugh more now?" Clara stopped. Do I laugh more? A lot more, Lily said. You and Uncle Nathan both. It's nice. She came into the kitchen and climbed onto the stool at the counter. Can I help with the bread? Yes, Clara said, and moved over to make room. She was still thinking about what Lily had said 20 minutes later when Nathan came in and poured himself coffee and looked at the two of them, elbow deep in bread dough, and said, "Should I be concerned about how much this kitchen is producing? We're feeding 5 people now," Clara said. The kitchen should produce 6, Lily corrected. Mrs. Garrett eats here on Tuesdays. 6, Clara agreed. Nathan leaned against the counter and drank his coffee and watched them, and there was something in his face that was so uncomplicated in its contentment that it made Clara's chest ache in the way things ache when they are healing rather than hurting. She had stopped waiting, but she had not quite named until this moment what she had stopped waiting for. It was this. Exactly this. The investigation into Walter Hayes's activities across 2 counties moved through the legal system with the pace of all official things, slower than the wronged, faster than the guilty prefer. By the time the formal charges were filed, 6 other families had come forward. Some had records like Mary Pierce. Others had only their testimony, the particular testimony of people who had been made to feel foolish for being taken, who stood up now because standing up was finally possible. Clara knew when each new family came forward because Greer kept her informed, and each time she read a new name, she felt a strange doubled feeling. Grief for what each family had lost, and something else underneath it. Something like the satisfaction of watching a wall come down brick by brick until you can finally see all the way through. Walter did not face it quietly. He hired better lawyers. He produced counter-arguments. He attempted twice to reframe the narrative, once through a letter to the town paper suggesting that personal vendettas were being dressed up as legal cases, and once through a direct approach to Nathan at the feed store that Nathan ended in 4 sentences, none of which Clara heard, but all of which Dobbs, who had been there, reported back with visible satisfaction. "What did he say?" Clara asked Dobbs. He said, Dobbs paused, apparently organizing the exact words. He said, "Walter, you've had your say in this town for a long time. That time is finished. If you approach me or my wife or any member of my family again, we'll add it to the list of things the judge is already looking at. Now take your hand off my arm and go home." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Nathan said that," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "He said my wife." Dobbs looked slightly confused by the emphasis. "Yes, ma'am, he did." Clara turned back to what she had been doing. "Thank you, Dobbs." Dobbs had, in the weeks since the sheriff's meeting, become something they had not anticipated genuinely useful. He had offered, without being asked, to make a formal statement about what Walter had asked him to do and what he had reported. It was not an easy thing to do. Admitting publicly that you had been used, that you had let yourself be used, was not a comfortable position. But he had done it, and the statement had been added to Greer's materials, and Clara had quietly arranged for Nathan to address the matter of his brother's debts through channels that did not involve Walter Hayes. Dobbs had not mentioned this, but the way he worked in the weeks that followed told her he understood. Some things don't require saying. The schoolhouse came from a conversation Clara had not planned. She had been in town for supplies 6 weeks after the sheriff's meeting. The town had changed toward her, in that way that small towns change when the story shifts. People finding ways to acknowledge a thing without quite admitting they had thought otherwise before. Margaret Hollis had recommended her to 2 women who needed sewing done. The minister had tipped his hat. Small things that were not small at all. She was coming out of the dry goods store when she nearly walked into a girl of about 8, walking alone, looking at the ground with the particular expression of a child carrying something heavy. Clara stopped. "Are you all right?" The girl looked up. Her dress was thin for the weather. Her shoes were too small. Clara knew that look the way feet had been held in shoes they'd outgrown because there was no money for new ones. "I'm fine," the girl said in the automatic way of a child who has been taught to say that. "Where are you headed?" "Home." She paused. "I was at the schoolhouse. But Mrs. Dennett says—" She stopped again. "What does Mrs. Dennett say?" Clara asked gently. The girl looked at her shoes. "She says families who can't pay the school fee shouldn't take up space that paying families need." She said it with the flat, careful tone of someone repeating something they have memorized, because it hurt too much to feel each time. So I have to go home. Clara looked at this girl. She thought about herself at 8 years old. At Eli, who had been reading books upside down on a porch step, because at least there were books on the ranch, and no one to tell him he couldn't have them. She thought about what her mother would have done. She thought about what she was going to do. "What's your name?" Clara asked. "Alice." "Alice, I'm Clara Caldwell. What's your family's name?" "Sutton," the girl said. "And do you like learning, Alice Sutton?" The girl looked at her with sudden wariness, the wariness of someone who has been offered things before and learned that offers have conditions. "Yes," she said carefully. "Then I'll be in touch with your family," Clara said, "because I think we can make a different arrangement." She went straight home and told Nathan at supper. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she was finished, he said, "How many children do you think?" She had been counting since the conversation. "In this county alone, I've seen at least 6 families who can't afford the school fee. Probably more. What do you need?" She looked at him across the supper table. This was the thing about Nathan, the absolute uncomplicated directness of his support. Not "are you sure," or "is this practical," or "let's think about the timing." Just "what do you need?" "A room," she said. "Or a building. Something I can use 3 days a week at least to start. Books, paper, basic materials." Nathan thought for a moment. "The old storage building near the east fence. We haven't used it in 2 years. It's solid, just needs cleaning out and some work on the stove." "That would do," Clara said. "I'll have the men start on it this week." Eli, who had been eating and listening with the focused attention he brought to anything that might involve him, said, "Can I help teach?" Clara looked at him. "You're 9. "I know the multiplication tables through 12, he said. "He does," Noah confirmed without looking up from his plate. "He recites them in his sleep. It's horrible." "Then you can help," Clara said. Eli's face did something luminous, and so it began. Not with ceremony, not with an official announcement. Just Clara and a fixed-up storage building and 7 children on the first morning sitting on benches that Nathan's ranch hands had built over a weekend, with books that Clara had written to 3 separate sources to obtain, and a fire in the stove that Eli had insisted on learning to light himself. Alice Sutton sat in the front row. She had walked 4 miles to get there. She arrived before anyone else. What Clara did not expect was the town. She had expected the families whose children came to quietly appreciate the school and say nothing publicly, because that was how people who had been made to feel that their poverty was a personal failing tended to operate. She had not expected Mary Pierce to show up on the second week with a donation of materials and the information that 2 other women in town wanted to contribute. She had not expected the minister to mention it from the pulpit carefully without naming names as an example of community looking after its own. She had not expected Margaret Hollis to appear one afternoon with a box of books she no longer needed, and to hand them to Clara with a directness that was Clara thought the closest Margaret Hollis would ever come to an apology she meant with her whole self. "These were my children's," Margaret said. "They're too old for them now." "Thank you," Clara said. Margaret looked at the building where she could hear children's voices from inside. "You're doing a good thing." "People were already doing good things," Clara said. "I'm just providing a place." Margaret looked at her for a moment, a longer, more honest look than any she had given before. "You're more than I took you for," she said. "Most people are," Clara said. Margaret almost smiled. Then she walked back to her wagon and drove away, and Clara carried the books inside and distributed them to 8 children who had never owned a book in their lives and watched their faces and thought about her mother. Her mother, who had worked and never quite understood why it was never enough, who had died thinking she had not done enough. Who had, in spite of everything, raised a daughter who could stand in a room and refuse to be taken for less than she was. Who had taught Clara without ever using these exact words that a person's worth is not determined by what they own or what others decide they deserve. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in fact, everything. John. The night that Walter Hayes was formally charged, 6 months after the meeting at the sheriff's office in a courthouse 2 counties over, where his influence did not reach, Nathan came home late and found Clara sitting on the porch waiting for him. She had gotten word from Greer by afternoon. She had told no one yet. She had made supper and helped Lily with her letters and listened to Eli recite multiplication tables and sat with Noah while he worked on the rope technique he had been perfecting for 2 months, and then she had put everyone to bed and come out to the porch to wait. Nathan rode in just after dark. He put up his horse himself the way he always did and came across the yard and up the porch steps and stopped when he saw her face. "You heard," he said, "this afternoon." He sat down beside her. They were quiet. "Is it what you wanted?" he asked. Clara thought about the question honestly. "It's what my mother deserved," she said. "I'm not sure I wanted anything exactly. I wanted it to be over. I wanted the truth to be the truth." She looked at her hands. "It is. So I suppose yes." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I got a letter today." Something in his voice made her look at him. "From my cousin," he said. "Edmund. The one who would have inherited the ranch if the marriage clause hadn't been met." He paused. "He writes that he has heard about what happened here this year, the school, the families." He stopped again. "He says he wanted me to know that if the land had come to him, he would not have done what I have done with it." Clara waited. "He says he's glad it stayed with me," Nathan said. "He says the land ended up where it should." Clara looked at him. At the sight of his face, the steady jaw, the profile of a man who had rebuilt himself from nothing, and then when no one was asking him to, had quietly spent years rebuilding things around him too. "He's right," she said. Nathan turned to look at her. "The land ended up where it should," she said. "So did I." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand. Not with the careful deliberateness of someone making a gesture, but the way you take someone's hand when it is simply the most natural thing in the world, when the distance between two people has been so thoroughly closed that reaching across it requires no thought at all. She let him. She held on. "I was thinking," Nathan said after a while, "about spring." "What about it?" "The garden," he said. "Your plans. You said you wanted to expand the south bed. Add the herb section." Clara smiled. She had been thinking about the herb section for months. "We'll need to turn the soil in March if we want it ready." "I know." His thumb moved across her hand. "I thought I'd do it myself. The turning. If you show me where." She looked at him. "You want to dig the garden." "I want to dig your garden," he said. "There's a difference." She laughed, the real kind, the startled out of her kind, the kind that Lily had noticed and commented on, and that was, she understood now, the sound of a person who has stopped bracing. "You can dig the garden," she said. "Good," he said. They sat on the porch together in the dark, in the particular quiet that belongs only to people who have come through something and are now finally simply on the other side of it. Somewhere in the house, Eli was almost certainly still awake, reading something he was supposed to have put down an hour ago. Noah would be asleep the way he slept now, deeply, without the restless tension that had marked his nights for years. Lily would be curled on her side with her braided hair spread on the pillow and her expression in sleep as focused and intent as it was in every waking moment. This was what Clara had built. Not instead of the life she had planned, she had never had the luxury of planning, but out of the wreckage of what someone else had tried to take out of the raw materials of two people who had arrived at the same place through different broken roads and had found to their own considerable surprise that they were exactly what each other needed. She had come here afraid and small, and certain that surviving was the best she could hope for. She had been wrong, and she had never been so grateful to be wrong in all her life. She thought about what she would tell Alice Sutton in school tomorrow. She had been working through a lesson on history, not the official textbook kind, but the real kind, the kind that is made of ordinary people making extraordinary choices in ordinary circumstances. The kind that does not always make the history books because it happens in kitchens and stables and sheriff's offices in small towns that the rest of the world has never heard of. The kind that matters anyway. She would tell Alice, The most important stories are the ones that happen close to the ground, to people who were told they didn't matter, who found out the hard way, always the hard way that they did. She would tell her a voice is not something you are given. It is something you use again and again in smaller and larger moments until one day you realize you have always had it. She would tell her the girl who arrives needing rescue is not less than the person who does the rescuing. Sometimes she becomes both. Sometimes that is exactly what was needed all along. The porch was quiet. The night was cold and clear. Nathan's hand was warm and certain in hers. Clara Whitmore had come to Caldwell Ranch with nothing but her mother's ring and the love she had for two boys who needed her. She had left nothing behind that was worth keeping, and everything she had built since the school, the garden, the home, the family that had formed around her, the way families do when you stop running and let yourself be still long enough for people to find you. All of it was hers, earned, chosen, real. She was not the shy girl who had signed her name with a trembling hand in a room full of strangers anymore. She was Clara Caldwell, and she was exactly where she had always been going, even when she hadn't known it, even when the road looked like a dead end, even when the only thing she could see ahead was the next hard step she had been going always here. Home.